What's that story you've never been able to tell? When I was 17, I worked at a grocery store with a guy named Brian. Normal guy, mid-20s, lil chub. Didn't really think much of him. One day he tells me about how he lives in an apartment by himself and that his neighbors are absolutely crazy. Like they would yell at him to be quiet, pound against the wall to get him to shut up, even though he wouldn't be doing anything. He would sneeze, and his neighbors would scream at the top of their lungs from next door. It was that bad. TBH, I didn't really care much when he was telling me this. I just wanted to go home and not work anymore. Couple days go by, and I noticed that Brian wasn't showing up anymore. Whatever. Didn't think much of that either. A month or two goes by, and he finally shows back up to work. So, being the nice friend I am, I asked him where he's been. He tells me he was actually fired because he was in the hospital. I didn't think that was a valid reason to fire someone, but what do I know? I didn't comment on that. I asked him why he was in the hospital, and he told me it was for personal reasons. I tell him it was good having him back, and carried on with my day. Fast forward a couple days to me talking to another coworker who was good friends with Brian. He says, "Did you hear what happened to Brian? Yeah, he was in the hospital and was fired or something. Do you know why though?" "No," he said, "it was personal." So this is what happened a couple months ago before Brian disappeared. He was at home by himself when his neighbors, surprise, start yelling at him through the walls for being too loud. Brian, telling himself I've had enough, decides to call the police and have them deal with it. The police arrived and started talking to the neighbors for quite some time. Hours go by with the police and neighbors. So he calls the police again to ask what's taking so long. The police respond with, "We left like an hour and a half ago." Turns out that the neighbors were never yelling at him. In fact, they were never there. Brian was schizophrenic and was hearing voices in his head. He had to go to a mental hospital for a month. One of the first times I invited my girlfriend to spend the night at my college apartment, I went to bed early. We are both gamers, but I'm an early bird and she's a night owl. She reassured me I could go to sleep without her because, little did I know, she had plans to unlock Toad, Toadette, and the special cup in Mario Kart, DD for the GameCube. My apartment complex had very strict parking. There were only 2 parking passes for me and my roommate, but I encouraged my girlfriend to park in the lot anyway, because I'd never seen a friend get towed in the couple of years I lived there. She really didn't want to get towed though, so I promised to pay if she got her car impounded. So I go to bed while she plays Mario Kart all night. Little did I realize she's an absolute freak at the game. I wake up early in the morning to find her passed out from a night of gaming. I fire up the GamerCube to play some Mario Kart with breakfast, not aware she unlocked almost everything in the game. I proudly proclaim, "You got towed." Barely awake she responds, "I got towed? Yeah. You got towed last night while I was sleeping. I can't believe it. I got towed? Yeah. Don't you remember?" She frantically checks behind the blinds to look outside at the parking lot. "I didn't get towed." "Yeah, you got Toad and Toadette last night." One of our best moments for sure. I grew up in a very conservative household. Sex was never talked about at all, and you knew if you got caught with something you shouldn't, you'd be in giant trouble. When I was 17 I bought a vibrator. I had literally no experience, even alone, but was super curious. The way it worked was you had to screw the bottom off it on to keep the batteries in, and to turn it on. I put it underneath my bed and thought I had it unscrewed enough that it would stay off until later. Well, I'm downstairs listening to a CD player with my headphones on, and suddenly I hear my 2 young sisters yelling about something and running around the house. I take my headphones off and I hear BZZZZZZ echoing through the house. My room was directly above the living room and my floor was wooden. They're feeling out, thinking there's a wasp in the house or something electrical is about to explode. Thank God my parents weren't home. They probably would have figured it out a lot easier. One sister runs upstairs, realizes it's coming from my room, and I dash ahead of her and just throw myself over the bed to feel underneath it. I turn off the vibrator and then tell them my old phone was under there and must have had an alarm on it, which made no sense. It had been months since I changed phones. They don't believe me and think it must be the pipes under my room. They tell my parents, when they get home, that the pipes freaked out. My family listens closely for months to see if we need to call a plumber. I decided to take my terrible secret to the grave, and then 10 years later posted on Reddit. The end. In the summer of 2007 I was working my landscaping job when I heard my cell ringing in the truck. My girlfriend at the time told me that they were saying that my brother is dead. Fast forward through a panic drive that I shouldn't have done to my mom's house. She answers the door and crumbles into my arms. I'm stunned. They leave to the cop station and moments after leaving I get a phone call on my mom's phone. It's the guy that was with him that we're thinking had something to do with his death. He plays stupid and wants inside information on whether or not he's being blamed. He hit him with his truck, killing him instantly. Said in court eventually that he looked at the dash and thought he had hit a deer. They had been witnessed having a fight earlier that day. Without being able to prove intent and no OJ lawyer, he got 4 months in jail. We drove to a neighboring city to deliver the bad news to his 9-year-old daughter. I'll never forget the sound of her cries. My brother was, well, my brother. Sharing this has always helped me move on bit by bit. Thanks for reading. Edit. My first gold/silver and wow this blew up. Thank you for the warm words everyone, and for the gold/silver kind strangers. I was a lonely kid in the mid 2000s, and I joined chat rooms like most kids/teens my age. I was a little younger than the average kid on there, as far as I knew, so I lied and upped my age on them. Said I was 15 or 16 instead of 11 or 12. I never gave actual info. I said I lived in a different state. Almost always gave a fake name. I thought I was clever. I mostly use the sites to either A. Talk to girls my age about life and school and boys, or B. Roleplay chat with boys, because my family was very strict and religious, and I was curious about such. I was super inexperienced and thought I could get some information or at least explore some different feelings from it. Looking back, that could have gone terribly wrong. However, it was the former reason that got me in trouble. A few years after my parents found out about the chat sites and grounded me permanently from the internet without supervision. Anyway, my dad got a call at work from an FBI agent located in our state asking about me being his daughter and my email address. I had foolishly given a girl my email address and exchanged names and small talk before she asked to exchange pictures. She sent one first, and it was so weird it freaked me into not sending one. The picture was so overtly sexual that I was just not interested. I forgot all about her after that. Turns out she was some 40-year-old child porn collector in a different time zone who was getting pictures from kids and swapping them around with other pedos. It was a very complicated, but apparently normal thing for those types of people. My email had been found in his computer, and so they had to talk to us, since I was still a minor. I didn't reply with a picture, so they weren't too worried about it. I wasn't much help, I don't think. I still refer to that person as a backquoter when I think about it, or when I tell someone like my so. The FBI lady called later to tell my parents he had been found guilty and sent to prison. I don't know his name. I don't want to. It definitely freaked me out for a long time. I haven't been able to really tell this story since it's so strange. When I was a night shift CNA at a assisted living, I had a resident have a wild week. When I was doing my rounds at midnight, she came barreling out of her room with her cross and white as a ghost. I asked if she had a nightmare and she responded, "There is a man in my room telling me to get out of his room." I peeked inside her room and saw it was empty. I was still internally set on her dreaming. She walked around with me most of that night. The next night was even more bizarre. I have a pager that lets me know if any residents need help or if any doors are opened. Well, it's 2 AM and the front door alarm goes off. That freaked me out since all the doors were locked. As I head up to the front to investigate, I see that resident with the door wide open and looking up at the sky. I asked her what she was doing and she replied, "Death is coming for X, I have to let him in." For days she kept talking about the angry man in her room. How he kept her up, he yelled at her and threw things on the floor. My curiosity got the best of me. X, what does the man look like as she described him? My heart sank. She was perfectly describing a resident who lived in the room previously who passed away. He didn't like anyone in his room. Did he ever tell you his name? I asked. She looked at me. It's X's name. I asked the other workers if anyone mentioned anything about that resident. All have denied. She was moved to another room 2 days later after her family was very concerned for her well-being. Her nightmares have since stopped. Another resident has moved into the room and hasn't had any problems. I've had bizarre things happen to me working at that facility, but nothing has topped that one. In elementary school, we had a program called the ARE where a police officer would come into our class and teach us about the dangers of substance and alcohol abuse. At the end of the year, he prompted us to write an essay about what we learned over the course of the year in DARE. He also advised us that the author of the best essay in the class would receive a stuffed lion, appropriately named Darren. Now I really wanted this lion, but the problem with that was my writing skills were those of a typical third grader. There was no way that anything I wrote about my time in DARE would stand out enough from my fellow classmates to win Darren. So I did what any desperate 10-year-old would do. Google DARE essay contest winners, and then plagiarize the first one that came up in my searches. Now this was done diligently, carefully proofreading to ensure that I wasn't going to turn in an essay with somebody else's name in it somewhere. I went through and changed phrasing or a word here and there, but by no means would it pass through Turnitin.com with less than 90% plagiarized. Confident in my chances of winning Darren, I turned in the essay to Mr. Officer, and what do you know? A week later we had our end of year reception at the municipal building, which also contained the police station. He listed the top 3 essays, 3rd place, 2nd place, and then he said, holding Darren, the best DARE essay submitted this year was written by Yasoi Curry. Come on up here, get your Darren stuffed animal, and read your essay to us please. I was so excited I won the animal. It was never even a thought that crossed my mind that I would have to deliver this speech. So I reluctantly walked up, took my stuffed animal, and all I can remember at this point is shaking so bad, it looked like I was going to fall over at the mic. All of my classmates, all of their parents, and the entire local municipality's worth of police officers with their full attention on me, a 10-year-old little fraud of a student. To this day, it's one of my most shameful moments, and I still have Darren sitting on my desk for discouragement from copying others' work. Remember when the world was supposed to end in December 21st, 2012? That night a bunch of my friends and I were hanging out in my apartment, smoking a lot of weed and playing games. We made a bunch of jokes about the world not having ended. I was pretty young and dumb, so I actually had some anxiety about that. It felt good to laugh it off. We go on my balcony to have a cigarette and watch the sunset. Out of nowhere there's an enormous explosion, and the sky flashes lime green. We all stop talking and stare as the sky flashes green, pink, yellow, and there are these crazy indescribable crackling noises. I'm stoned as a beach and I decide this is it, it's happening. I go into emergency preparedness mode for the alien invasion, and for some reason start filling my bathtub with water. I think it was so we'd have water to drink if we were hiding from aliens and the water lines got interrupted. I'm stupid. We all run around yelling and freaking the frick out for about 5 minutes while the sky continues to strobe neon colors. So what had happened was a transformer blew somewhere nearby. No idea that this was what happened in that circumstance, but due to the date, I was not the only one to lose it. My mother was out, and one of her companions fell to her knees and started praying the rosary for the second coming when the sky started changing colors. Never found a good time to share that story, but it cracks me up, and I still catch shit for the freaking bathtub. I didn't know this until after, but apparently when you're a raging alcoholic you lose out on REM sleep. Lose out on enough REM sleep and your body forces you to kind of dream while awake, leading to auditory hallucinations. I'm at my job and the week before found out that if I only drank in the morning and not also at lunch, I'd get the shakes before the end of the day. I skipped a couple lunch drunks and started hearing things at the end of the day. Problem was, I didn't know I was hearing things. First day, I hear the Wheel of Fortune chant coming from a meeting room. A lady walks by, and I ask her if she hears it too. I'm sure she had no freaking clue what I was asking. Second day, I hear chanting for someone named Erica in the conference room. This made sense, because I used to work at a place that employed someone named Erica who did marketing visits at agencies like my former place of employment. Third day, I'm at home, and I hear my roommate yelling at me, yeah, he's being a bussy, because his dad smoked a cigarette. My dad used to smoke, and had also had a heart attack recently. I thought he was shit talking me, so I yell from my room, I said heart attack not cigarette you beach. His girlfriend and him came up and were like, dude, what is going on? We're not even talking, is everything okay? Over the next couple weeks I tried to sleep without drinking, but I ended up sleeping 1 hour or so, and during the night I'd grind my teeth so freaking hard they felt loose the next morning. I started to realize the past couple months had been filled with auditory hallucinations, and I was probably just yelling at people randomly. Anyway, I've been sober for a little over 6 years now. I largely believe the universe is random and chaotic, but sometimes crap happens that makes me think there's some order and fate to it all. I fostered for a corgi rescue, and at one point I had a dog staying with me overnight, because she was being transported across state to get to another foster home, while she was listed on the website to find a new owner. After she left the next morning I fretted about it, but told myself she would do great with another family and I should let it go. I had been wanting a second dog, but wasn't completely sold on the idea yet. A week later I couldn't stand it anymore and emailed the rescue coordinator to see if she had been adopted, since she wasn't listed on the rescue site. The coordinator told me that out of sheer happenstance she had completely forgotten to do the dog's online rescue profile, so yes, she was still available. And that's how I got my second corgi. Beyond that, I'm usually the type of person who leaves work right at the end of my shift every single day, because as far as I'm concerned they get my 8 hours and that's that. Well, one day I get held up by some extra work I was doing to help someone. I left maybe 5 minutes late and ended up stopped by a train passing through town. I was really agitated until I got to the area where I usually turn onto the highway and saw there was a massive wreck that had happened not even 10 minutes before I got there, because there was only a short line of cars backed up and no rescue workers there yet. If it hadn't been for that call that made me get stuck behind the train. So sometimes I wonder. I really do. This is a story of miraculous escape of a little perch. I was ice fishing next to my parents' cottage in a lake in Finland. It was a warm spring day and the sun was shining. I caught many little perch fish when suddenly the line snapped and broke. My guess at the time was that the sharp edge had broken the line. I was a bit upset of losing my lure. Nevertheless, I took another rod from my bag and continued fishing in the same hole. Then I felt an intense tension in the line and started reeling in the fish. The fish was near the hole and I saw it was a big northern pike. My initial thought was that it can't fit from the hole, but it did. The head was above the surface when all of a sudden the line snapped again. Holy shit, I thought, but I reacted quickly and managed to hold the pike with my boot until I found a lifting hook from my bag. With the hook I lifted the pike and rejoiced my good fortune and quick thinking. After catching the pike I decided to get my stuff and head back to the cottage, which was close by. Then I started to gut the fish. I started from the pike. The pike was well fed, and I decided to open the bowl to see what it had eaten. I slowly started cutting the bowl when a small perch sprang out and was twitching on top of the ice where I was gutting. Consequently, I inspected the little perch and saw some shining object hanging from its mouth. Then I realized that it was a lure and some fishing line. It was actually the exact lure which I had lost earlier. I almost couldn't believe it myself. The little perch had eaten my lure, then it had been eaten by a pike, digestion slowly working its magic when suddenly a light at the end of the tunnel. Such a story to tell its friends. Because of this, I decided to let go of the little perch, so it could see another day. In 1999 I was a senior in high school, and performing a fun and innocent senior prank towards the end of the school year was tradition for us, as is most American high schools. There were various bands of me and my fellow seniors conjuring up innocent and fun ideas to somehow get school cancelled for the day. Being a bit of a merry prankster myself, I was happy to take the lead on communicating, organizing, and executing the prank. Much infighting ensued about what to do between the various senior cliques. We were deadlocked, and plans had all but fizzled. A breakthrough came when my father made my brother and I help clean out a neighbor's garage, packed to the brim with 40+ years of junk. Didn't take long for me to open a box and find what looked like a stick of dynamite labeled marine smoke flare, or something like that. This was absolutely not getting thrown out, and found a new home in the trunk of my car. April 20th, 4/20 man, was right around the corner, and as most of us in high school were stoners, I thought it'd be funny to light it off somewhere that day. Fast forward to the 20th of April 1999, and no prank had officially been settled on amongst the cliques. I decided on a whim during a very unsupervised study period, and without telling a soul, I said frick it, went to the student parking lot, grabbed the marine smoke flare out of my trunk and headed for the main stairwell. The main stairwell was the only stairwell that connected all 3 floors of our relatively small high school. More importantly, there was a small shaft between the looping stairs that went from the 3rd floor to the basement floor, so I ignited the smoke flare and dropped it down the shaft and boogied back to study hall without anyone knowing I was gone. Mind you, my study hall room was probably the furthest room in the school from the main hallway, so I figured no one would suspect me. Maybe a minute later the fire alarm went off, and the reality of the situation hit home. As me and fellow students stepped into the hallway to exit the school, the entire hallway outside the study hall was filled with thick blue smoke. This hallway was 1 floor up, and far from where I actually lit off the smoke flare, and the smoke was so thick we couldn't find the exit. I couldn't imagine how thick the smoke was in the stairwell and adjacent hallways connected to it. I was instantly filled with deep regret, and my nerves were beyond shook. I thought I was going to puke. Did I just trap and kill the entire high school for a stupid senior prank? We literally had to crawl on our hands and knees and hug the wall until we saw the bright orange light of the exit sign. We were choking, gasping on the smoke, but managed to get out safely. Upon exiting the building, it seemed like all the town's police and fire trucks were already on scene. I was actually impressed with their response time, but the reason for that will come in a few. As the firemen geared up and rushed inside, police and teachers ushered all of us as far away from the school as was safe. It was then when I turned back and got the full glimpse of the situation. Out of almost every open door, window, and orifice that led outside poured the thickest, dankest, bluest smoke I'd ever seen. I'd come to find out later that the smoke flare I ignited is used for when you're stranded at sea and can cover a number of square miles with smoke. Hundreds of students and teachers surrounded the entire school in bewilderment and fear of what was transpiring, some hysterically crying. Parents had caught word and began racing to the school to make sure their little Johnny and Cissy were alright. Understandably, at one point I remember being so weak, afraid, remorseful that I actually fell to my knees and laid down. I literally couldn't move. I just knew at any moment firefighters would start emerging from the school with dead students, friends, and teachers. The police presence had grown from the township cops to the county SWAT unit who were decked out in heavy military gear. My life once again flashed before my eyes. That was it. I was going away for life. That thought would not stop racing through my mind. It was about 2 hours into the whole ordeal when the smoke finally cleared out of the school. I hadn't seen any bodies or injuries pulled out, and the students were no longer crying. It seemed an air of calm began to emerge. The SWAT team was the first to leave, and the cops and firefighters were kind of joking around with each other, so I began to feel that maybe at the very least I wasn't going to jail for murder. The scene had cleared, and there were in fact no injuries or deaths, thank fricking Christ. Deemed safe to re-enter, the entire school was then ushered into the gym where almost immediately police began interrogating students. Rumors were flying off the gym walls about who knew what about what. Of course I reunited with my closest crew in the gym corner and began speculating about the situation, but like I said before, I hadn't told a soul about what I planned to do and ultimately did. And I knew in the seriousness of that moment that I couldn't tell anyone. Not even my closest homies who I had done some very questionable / criminal things with before. The police and school admin opted to keep the entire school on lockdown in the gym for the remainder of the day. Interestingly enough, every single one of my friends and cliques involved in planning a senior prank had been thoroughly interrogated, except for me. I was freaking dumbfounded to say the least. The eeriest part about the entire day happened right before we were finally allowed to leave. Police informed everyone that during the senior prank 2 students in Columbine Co. had entered their high school armed to the teeth and massacred 15 students and teachers. Of course the police knew this and thought there was a connection between the two, hence the massive police presence. This obviously did not make me feel any better. Over the following weeks the interrogations continued and the prank was the talk of the town, but nothing came of it as I kept the entire story to myself. I was absolutely dying to tell my closest friends what I had pulled off, but knew one peep of it would be my demise. The school year came to a close shortly thereafter and so did the investigation. I absolutely could not believe that I was never once interrogated or even questioned about the incident given my willingness to lead the charge on planning the senior prank that year. I spent a great deal of time after that moment reflecting on how incredibly stupid of a thing it was for me to do and can't even express how thankful I'm no one was hurt or killed. But after all was said and done I was proud of myself for keeping a secret like that from oozing out of my stupid pubescent mouth. It saved me from serious jail time and for that I have no regrets. A few months passed before I told a buddy and of course it took no time for it to spread amongst the inner circle of my crew. They knew the gravity of the situation and who needed to know and who didn't. This happened when I was living in Berlin. A middle-aged graying guy, seemingly African American, who was dressed pretty shabbily boarded the U1 subway on a Sunday morning with a foldable chair and an old clarinet, I guess. He sat on the chair in front of the door and played an out-of-tune Spider-Man theme song on it and then started talking to me and 2 Italian girls sitting beside me. He claimed to be an ex-math professor at the MIT who left his job and is going around the world warning people about of nuclear reactors in the northern hemisphere that are about to go off anytime soon and no one is doing anything about it. I was pretty amused at this point, but he kept talking and asked about me. I told him I was a ComC student, so he asked me to name any ComC books that he might have read. I named a few of the popular ones, and he blew raspberries and said of course to each of them. He then went on to recommend me a book on math that I had never heard about, which I later looked up, and it seemed to be a very interesting and high-rated book. At some point during the conversation, he also claimed the name of his PhD supervisor, who I also later looked up, but I don't remember finding him online. I have to say his voice was very loud and his speech was a bit slurred. By this time, a few of the fellow passengers asked him to keep it down saying that they were being disturbed. At the next stop, while getting off a young lady said to him, "You're giving me a headache on a Sunday morning." At this point, he asked me if I thought he was loud, and I was put in a weird spot, so I just said, "Yeah, a bit." So he just got up and said to everyone, "You know what? Frick y'all, the nuclear reactors are gonna go off very soon." Turned towards the door and got off at the next stop. I don't think I will ever forget this encounter. Some friends and I hang out at a bar. A solid 10 of us. A group of real friends going on 20 years. A guy came into the bar, we'll call him Bob, on his first occasion, and got blind drunk in no time and left. Bob did the same thing the next night and subsequently became a regular, but the group kept their distance. One evening, one of my friends noticed Bob was sobbing in his beer. My friend went over and asked Bob if everything was okay. Bob said his 7-year-old niece had been killed in a drunk driver. We all expressed our sympathy. After a few weeks of intermittent drunk visits, he came in and cried in his beer again. His stepmother had died. Bob said he was closer to her than his mom. A few months later, crying again, his sister had jumped off a parking garage. Bob's life was a Greek tragedy. My group of friends and I didn't know what to make of it. Once Bob got to know more of my group of friends, the more erratic and violent he became. Bob threatened others and insulted the whole group. The guy wasn't stable. It was becoming clear Bob had a habit of pulling people into his orbit then resenting that person and threatening them. Then he showed up at the far end of the bar one day crying in his beer. Exhausted of the act, one of the guys nicely asked if he was okay. He wasn't. His 7-year-old niece had been killed by a drunk driver and his stepmother was gravely ill and expected to die within the week. Wait, what? We all got quiet. The next day, one of the guys calls me and says there are no obituaries in the guy's hometown paper that collaborate with his claims. That night, we went to the bar and saw Bob. I asked him if there was a charity we could donate to in memory of his niece. Bob didn't expect anyone to ask such a question. At that moment, one of the guys went up to him with an article he had pulled up from the guy's hometown paper from that day honoring his stepmother for her volunteer work promoting a citywide run that was happening a few months from that date. Bob had Munchausen's and/or a factitious disorder. Bob also had a horrible memory as to whose sympathies he preyed on when he was making up his stories that garnered him that attention he couldn't get through normal socialization. Within a week, Bob had become way too confrontational for the bar's management, and he was banned from the bar. It's a terrible disorder, but a learning experience that made me and my friends closer. We wink and nod when we are reminded of the experience in the slightest way, but we never speak of the experience in story form. I had some mental health issues when I was entering my teens. My dog died. I found out I have a hormonal condition. I moved schools twice and then lost all my friends due to a smear campaign. It was just too much, and I had my first panic attack and breakdown, so mum pulled me out of school. This coincided with Nan's dementia advancing to the point that she needed to be transitioned into an aged care facility. Pretty stressful time. Dad has always left everything up to mum, and he and I weren't on good terms anyway because of his alcoholism and never having any time for me. So I only really had one parent looking after me, and unfortunately, she didn't seem to have a clue what she was doing and was overburdened. I didn't get the psychological help I needed, nor the homeschooling. Pretty much all of my time was spent online with no supervision, where I found a forum for people with mental health issues. It had an attached chat room and a guy made friends with me. I'm going to have to cut out so much of this because it's a lot as it is. Anyway, you can see where this is going. I was groomed between the ages of 13 and 16 by a guy from another country. Sadly, my family allowed it to happen. Facilitated it, actually. It started friendly, then it slowly progressed. He sent me jewelry and love notes, stuffed animals and music. Spoke to me online for hours every single day. He told me he loved me and that we would start a life together. When I was 15 he flew to my country, staying in my bedroom for 2 weeks, where you can guess what went on. He also drank almost constantly, something my dad found endearing. It was treated as though it was slightly unconventional because of the long distance online situation, but not for any other reason. My parents and I took him around to see some of the sights. Hell, as soon as we got home from picking him up from the airport, he and I went for a walk alone near freaking bushland, which seems so obviously dangerous. It's as though my parents were groomed too, but they never really had any interaction with him over the years this was happening. He proposed to me at the beach during sunset with a beautiful ring and said he knew I wasn't old enough yet, but it was a promise. He went home and things progressed to become even more intense online, and things became twisted, perverted beyond the obvious perversion that this whole freaking situation clearly was. I was never comfortable with the sexual stuff, but it was such a long grooming process that my mind was absolutely screwed with. I learned to act and ignore the negative feelings. Another 6 to 8 months pass. Still 15, I traveled to another continent on my own to stay with him for 7 weeks in a tiny snowy town, organized and bankrolled by my parents. This is where things go from sexually strange to sexually sadistic, and generally sadistic, which I don't want to detail. I would have my 16th birthday in that man's house, and on that day, I would discover his other online relationship with a grown woman in a country that shares a border with his. When my 7 weeks were up, and I went home, he left for her country and married her. He made me feel like it was all my fault, that I was ugly, and I had taken advantage of him caring about me as a friend. My parents also made me feel like it was my responsibility. I was 22 before I went to a community college to take a high school equivalency course. Prior to that, my education was pretty much whatever I learned, being online all day and night. I never felt like I could ever properly tell anyone about my teen years, because for a long time it felt like my fault, and it would implicate my parents. Now it is only that it would make my parents seem like such awful people, and I don't know how to have that conversation with anyone. Aside from an outlet like this, I don't talk about it. I'm still screwed up in a bunch of significant ways. I have since been through so much shit that I'm surprised I'm still alive. But I'm no longer suicidal, and I beat my addictions. It took years and years, but I fully realize that what happened to me isn't my fault and there is still hope for my future. Thank you to those of you that read all this. My father sexually abused me, physically and mentally, for years. I only recently opened up to my wife of 12 years about this. Many times I pushed it away because it wasn't as bad as a lot of other stories I heard about. It took me a long time to realize abuse is abuse, and it being on a smaller scale doesn't make it not abuse. The physical aspect would be if we were playing around or wrestling and he would shove his hand down my pants, grab my genitals, claim he had me now, asked what I was going to do, etc. This continued on and off through my formative years. When I finally realized just how wrong it was, I kicked him so hard I gave him a Charlie horse that lasted 3 days. I never told anyone but my wife. A lot of the mental stuff would be him bringing up either his or my genitalia in conversation. Sometimes he would think it was funny to reminisce when I was a toddler and confused by an accidental erection, or he would talk about the one time, the only time, I saw his genitals while we were in a public bathroom and made a comment about them. Again, I was a toddler. By the time I was actually willing to tell my mother about it, her relationship with my father had been so strained that they were fighting daily and divorce was mentioned almost daily. The one time I was about to tell my mom, she said, before I could say anything, that if they split up I was going to live with my dad. That kept my mouth shut pretty much to this day. As for why I don't mention it now, my parents' relationship is better now than it ever has been. It improved a lot after I moved out. It makes me think that I was the problem all along. My parents are old. I don't know if my dad forgot or if he wants to forget, but I haven't brought it up. When I was 9, my father touched my developing breasts right in front of the cashier at the little corner store. I remember feeling so frightened by the sudden action. He just said, "I want to see how big you getting," as he reached out and grabbed my breast and proceeded to cup it. He had this strange creepy look on his face, like he was excited at the feel of it. I felt so uncomfortable, embarrassed and confused. The cashier just laughed and continued to ring up our orders. I knew an adult was to never ever touch me inappropriately, and if someone did I was supposed to report it. But he was my dad. At that age I had no idea that some sick parents did despicable things to their own offspring. I was very uncomfortable after that incident for a long time, but didn't say anything to my mom. They weren't together and split up by the time I was 2. He wasn't around much, and I didn't see him often. But months later, when he called asking to come get us, dread just consumed my body, and I was terrified. He's never done anything like that again, and we have a good relationship now. Not too long after that incident I was molested by an adult male cousin who was diagnosed with cancer at that time. My paternal great aunt lived across the street, and after school my sister and I went to her house, because our parents were working, and we couldn't of course be alone by ourselves. This cousin didn't do much, but lay in bed. I was like every other average 9-year-old, playful and full of energy. One day he told me to settle down and come lay down beside him in the bed. I did as I was told, and he covered us up with sheets from the shoulders down. I drifted off to a quick nap, but woken to feeling him messing and fondling me under my clothes while he pleasured himself. I was instructed not to tell anyone because I'd get in trouble. And that went on for a short while. I wasn't sure of my own body and didn't understand what he had done to me or what happened. I didn't know what sex was, let alone identify the girl and boy anatomy. He died a year later from a unspecified stage 4 cancer that I can't remember. After that I didn't think much of it and allowed it to become a hazy distant memory that I rarely think about, but when I do it makes me depressed and ruins my whole mood. I hadn't realized how much of an impact it had on me until a therapy session. Anxiety, depression, nymphomaniac, dislike for bald guys, can't remember certain moments in my life. I told my mom last year and she broke down in tears because she was molested and thought she failed at keeping her kids safe. I had to assure her that it wasn't anyone's fault. This world is just full of twisted people. I suspect this now deceased cousin did this to my little sister, who recently admitted she was inappropriately touched, but refuses to reveal whom. In high school, I almost accidentally died by drowning in a sewer. It was raining super hard when I was walking home from school. There was a flood in the way, but it wasn't really deep. It's not even knee height. Nonetheless, I still tried to wait for a tricycle to ride all the way home as to not get my pants wet, but in the end, I decided to brave the flood and worry about the pants later. I was walking on the sidewalk, which is still somewhat submerged in water, when I suddenly felt an open manhole hidden in the water. I was able to grab a hold of the edge of the manhole, but I was already submerged chest height. Even worse, the water in the pipes were rushing rapidly and was pulling my body inside the manhole. Nobody was around, so I had to pull myself out of there. Perhaps it was adrenaline that helped me, since my upper body strength wasn't the best. Whatever the case was, I was so relieved when I was able to pull myself out. But I was also incredibly angry that there were no signs or warnings that there was an open manhole here, since this area was under construction weeks ago. Though I'm also angry at myself for being an impatient idiot and deciding to risk the flood. When I came back home all wet, my parents were simply furious. They waited for so long for me and didn't get any calls from me. My phone got wet. I decided to tell them later about my near-death experience, but I wasn't able to since my parents spent the rest of the day being incredibly mad at me for being irresponsible. They only thought I waded through the flood and didn't know about the manhole. I never ever got to say this to them or anyone at all, so it's kind of a relief typing this here. I could only imagine if I actually got sucked in the manhole. The current would just continuously pull me deeper inside the pipes, while I have no chance to escape. I figured I'm a bit late for anyone to see this, but I'll get it off my chest regardless. My dad and I had a very rocky relationship starting from when I was 10. He developed PTSD from a horrible near-death experience at work, on top of his bipolar disorder. He turned into this very nasty dude some of the time, and it was just really hard to deal with. He was usually such a funny, happy dude. My mom left him when I was 13, and it became hard to see him and text/call him because he was often drunk. The last time I saw him, he said to me, "If I didn't have you, I would be nothing. I have no one else but you." I spoke to him through text a few times after that, but it would always, every time without fail, end in an argument. It wasn't unknown to go a few months without texting or calling or seeing him, because he was always up and down with his moods, and I was dealing with my own shit. Eventually, I just gave up. My last text to him was on the 18th of April 2015. It ended in another argument, and I never messaged back to apologize, because I thought I had been wronged, and he needed to step up and say sorry for once. Late May, the same year, my mom sent him a photo from my school formal through text, but he never replied. The longer I went without him texting me, the angrier I got. I had my mom's side of the family always telling me he's the parent, he has to message you, and I get that, but I could have just stopped being stubborn and just sent him a freaking message before it was too late. Weeks bled into months, and before I knew it, it was August, and I still hadn't spoken to him. I remember the weeks leading up to August 15th. I would walk through the door to our kitchen, and a bright light would flash in my face, but it would go away immediately after I turned the light on. I was terrified to walk through the house alone. My childhood home burnt down. None of my family were living there, not related at all, but it hit me so hard I ended up breaking down in a supermarket. I don't know why, but I felt like I was losing my childhood. I considered texting my dad, but frick knows if he'd reply, so I didn't. A week after the house burning down, my cousin messages me. She said her dad, my uncle, dad's brother, needs to call me, and to give her my number. My cousin and I never ever got along, and my uncle was up and down with giving a shit whether I was alive or dead, so I thought it was just family drama. She said he would call me in half an hour. I waited very anxiously. I thought I was going to be screamed at for not talking to my dad for 4 months. I remember this stupid detail so vividly. I wrote a status on my Facebook profile that said I've been dealt a difficult hand, but I've played my best. I thought it was witty, considering most people on my Facebook knew about my mental health issue, and they knew I was on the upwards. 10 minutes later, my uncle calls me. I walk through to the opposite end of the house from my mom and my boyfriend. Sure as shit, I walk through the kitchen door, and there's that bright light. I didn't turn the kitchen light on this time. I walked to the hallway. When I finally said hello, Uncle Matt, are you there? And he said my name. It's your dad. He's dead. He's dead. My name. He committed suicide. I'm so sorry honey. I'm so sorry. And he's freaking hysterical. My mom and I remember this very differently. She claims I screamed at the top of my lungs and started bawling my eyes out. I remember that I fell to the floor, getting covered in stupid Labrador hair from the carpet, and asked him questions. Was there a note? How did he do it? Are you okay? He told me there was a note, and Dad had written a page specifically for me, and that he was sitting in his chair. My mom ripped the phone out of my hand and yelled at my uncle. I would have been fine knowing that he was sitting in his chair. He loved playing video games. It wasn't out of the ordinary for him to just laze on the couch. That's how I wanted to remember him. I didn't care if my uncle was lying. He knew that what he told me could change how I reacted. But my mom had to find out all the details, and she was so freaking angry that my uncle lied. She gave me every detail. He was hanging from the manhole in the ceiling in his hallway, and he used his favorite blue and yellow robe, and that he didn't mention her in his note, and the worst part, he had been dead dating back to May 4th. His final page said, "May God have mercy on my soul." Dated at the top. The 5 pages before that were written on that final day I spoke to him. April 18th. Dated perfectly at the top of every page, signed at the end of the last one from that day. I can only talk about it when I'm drunk, how he would have liked. But I can't get out many more words than why would my dad do that to me? My mom always brings up that she asked me so many times if I wanted to go see him, that she'd drive me there if I wanted to, but I always refused. Once, she and I did make the hour-and-a-half drive. She parked out on the road and we couldn't see his car, so I said let's just go. She tried to convince me to go knock on the door, but I was afraid I would make him angry by not calling first. She's always saying how she should have just knocked or tried to break in, but I can't help but think about how, if he was alive, he would have called the police on her, because they freaking hated each other. I was afraid he'd call the cops on me, and I was the only person in his life. She has some delusional idea that they were still in love, even though they didn't talk for 5 years except for screaming down the phone at each other. She tells everyone that he was her husband at the time of death, even though he left literally everything but $8K to me that was reserved for my uncle who he owed money to. My mom manipulated me in front of her lawyer so she could get the majority of his money to pay her mortgage off, because that's what he would have wanted. I don't care about money, not at all, but I feel wronged. I don't know why. The people in my life know that my dad killed himself when I was 17. They know that he was there for a fair chunk of time after he died, before he was found. They know I'm not over it, even though when I'm sober and the topic comes up, I tell them it was 5 years ago this year and I'm fine, and I'm over it. But of course they're not stupid, and they are often there when I'm out of my mind drunk, and it's all I'll talk about in only a few words over and over again. And they know that I freaking hate myself and blame myself every day. But they don't know what happened leading up to August 15th 2015. And OMG, they do not understand why people saying, "May the 4th be with you" on Star Wars Day makes my skin crawl. Not only did my dad say that every goddamn year because he was crazy obsessed with Star Wars, but I freaking hate myself for not texting him that stupid Star Wars Day quote on May 4th 2015. I could have stopped him. When I eat food, I eat it rapidly. I've always been the fastest eater out of anybody I know. People who don't know me well will comment on it, but nobody ever really asks why. My brother has a rare form of epilepsy, and one of the reasons it is so rare is that the seizures it causes are lethal. When I was a child, him having one a week was not uncommon, and there was a period where he was averaging more than one a day. I was too young to be left alone, so my parents would take all of us to the hospital. At the time the hospital we went to did not allow children past the waiting room. My parents went to be with my brother. I don't blame them. My brother was literally dying in front of their eyes every time they brought him in, and I would be left to sit in the waiting room, alone. 4 hours waiting. 4 years old sitting in a chair, where my feet can't touch the ground. Surrounded by people in terrible pain, cursing me because my brother got to go ahead of them, waiting and alone. After my brother was stable, one of my parents would come out, let me know that my brother was okay this time, and get me something from the vending machine. Candy was a treat and they would get me some, so my night wouldn't be too terrible. Or maybe if my brother had a seizure around a mealtime, they'd bring me some food they had thrown in a bag. Then they would head back into the back to do paperwork and sit with my brother while he was recovering and or to alert the nurses if the seizure flared up again. Unaccompanied children weren't allowed food. I don't know if that was a rule or the nurses were just assholes, but I wasn't allowed food all the same. After whichever parent came out left, if my candy bar or M&Ms or peanut butter sandwich were unfinished, and a nurse saw, they'd come and take it away from me. More than once food was taken right out of my hands. Anything I didn't eat immediately, preferably while my mom or my dad were still in sight, was food I wasn't going to be allowed to finish. So that's why I eat quickly. I get terrible anxiety if I have to stop eating for more than the time it takes to speak a few sentences, and I don't stop eating until I'm done. Over 30 years later, and I'm still worried some nurse twice my height is going to come and take my food away from me. This all happened about 6 years ago. There was this hard kid at school. No one would mess with him. I wasn't that big of a deal. Friendly to everyone. Decent guy. The thing is, me and his girlfriend hit it off behind the scenes after a typical high school house party. We got each other's numbers and started texting a lot. We worked out that we only lived 10 minutes from each other rather than the 45 minutes with her and her boyfriend. We met up without telling anyone, and we are just instantly attracted to each other. We got along like a house on fire and we related in almost every way. We kissed and played a lot but never went all the way. Eventually I invited her to my house while my parents were away so we could hang out. We chatted, played some games, and during the game we somehow agreed to bake a cake. I'm not joking when I say we made the most incredible Victoria sponge cake ever. It was so delicious that even when my dad tried it, who's a professional cake maker, he said it was amazing. Then she went home and we sort of drifted apart. Never done the deed, never talked again, and she broke up with her boyfriend imminently. She travels now, I think, from her Instagram. I have no idea what he's doing. He never used social media. All I took from this experience is that this girl and I had a special bond when it came to baking cakes. And we would have probably had the best sexual chemistry. Minor details. I haven't even told my missus this story. Nobody knows, apart from you guys. Edit. I still have the picture of the cake. I married the woman of my dreams 20 years ago. We eventually moved to a wonderful community, had very promising careers. She had a co-worker who was struggling big time, and we decided to shack him up in our spare room while he could get his sheet together. My best friend from high school was getting married, and I was super excited for him. It meant traveling several hundred miles to attend, and I was up for it. My wife was not, unsurprisingly, because she's incredibly self-conscious, particularly around people she's never met before. So be it. She wished me well, have a great time and so on. 3 days of joy and bliss. Reuniting with old friends I hadn't seen for several years. I received so much love. And I return home, glowing, full of love and joy. She picks me up at the bus station after my 12 hours on the road. As soon as I got in the car, I knew something was up. She and the new roomie slept together while I was away. Yeah, I knew he was into her, but he also showed me an enormous amount of respect. Yeah, I knew our marriage was kinda faltering a bit after almost 10 years together. But, yeah, it happened. We tried to talk it out. Roomie had moved out before I even got home. Tried to figure it all out. But it was obvious that everything crumbled that weekend. She and I are still super close. In the end, I think we probably should have been siblings instead of spouses. and her current partner of many years has become the closest friend I've ever had. So there's that. One rainy day I left work by myself to get lunch. The restaurant I wanted to go to was out of the way, which led me down a road that had a long stretch with no businesses or houses. About halfway down this road, I saw a man, woman, and 2 kids push a stroller and carrying luggage along the side of the road, going the opposite direction. I was really hungry, but I just couldn't drive by and let a family walk through the rain like that. I turned around as soon as I could and pulled over to offer them a ride. We loaded the stroller and luggage in the back of my car, and they told me they were trying to get to a hotel that was several miles away. The well-spoken middle-class family told me that they had come from the airport on a shuttle bus that was supposed to take them to their hotel, but for some reason, the shuttle bus driver had stopped miles short of their hotel and told them that he couldn't take them any farther. He had also given them directions to their hotel that were wildly inaccurate. This was years before smartphones or handheld GPS. The family had already walked more than a mile in the wrong direction, in the rain. Yes, it's what you're probably suspecting. The shuttle bus driver was white, the family was black, and this all took place in the southern US. I apologized to the family on behalf of my whole race and took them to their hotel, where I helped them unload their luggage and stroller. I waited until I knew they were checked in, then before we parted, while I was shaking the father's hand, I said, "God bless you. I hope your trip goes so much better than how it started." I don't like to tell that story because it sounds like I'm bragging on myself. But I want to tell that story because I want people to know that some of us really do reach across the aisle for no reason other than wanting all of us to be treated like decent human beings. To summarize the background, I had basically no money because it was all tied up in my bail after I was arrested after being the victim of a violent crime. Long story, very traumatic, but stuff I've been able to talk about. But I was short for rent. Only like $50, but still more than I could ask anyone to spot me. And I was desperate. My landlord was ruthless about kicking people out. There was no late rent, it was just either you paid in full on time or you were fully out in 48 hours. So I went on Grindr and found a man who would pay me $50 for sex. My options were very limited, cause my town was super small, only a couple hundred people. And he was old and fat and gross, and it was painful and unpleasant, and I did things I would never normally do, but like I needed $50, you know? And I felt so terrible afterwards. I felt disgusting. And I tried to talk to one of my friends about it, but she just didn't get it. Like, but you are gay, and you're into the dad bod / bear types, right? And you have sex all the time, and you even got money for it. I mean, it was just like, since I'm sexually active anyway, this should be a step up, since I'm both having sex and making money. But it wasn't. It was violating. It was terrible. But as soon as I brought up, like I got paid for it, she was saying I should be happy about it, right? That it was a victory for me, that I should even keep doing it to make more money. So I just stopped trying to talk about it, cause I felt even worse, like I felt terrible for doing it, and I felt terrible for feeling terrible about doing it. I expected the most sympathy from her, because she'd gone through something kind of similar, like she had been sexually assaulted, but everyone blamed her for it, because she was sexually active. And like, having sex for money isn't the same as being sexually assaulted, but I at least didn't expect you're having sex anyway, so what's the problem to come from her? So I just haven't tried to talk to anyone else about it, and that was about a year ago, and still, when I think about it my chest tightens, and it's hard to get out of my head, and I just want to take 100 showers, and then lay on the floor. But mostly I want to talk to my friends about it, and receive affirmations of yeah, that sounds like it probably sucked, instead of woohoo, use your body, get that bread. I'm Vietnamese American. I came here when I was 13. This will become relevant later. I was a senior in high school when I had my first episode of sleep paralysis. This was before it was well known and considered cool or trendy. It was after wrestling practice at 6 p.m. I was tired, so I thought I'd take a nap. I had a radio clock on next to my bed and was listening to Kiss FM when I fell asleep. I woke up, staring at the ceiling, couldn't move. There was a ringing in my ears. I freaked out. I tried to move but couldn't. I tried yelling out for my mom. Ma. Ma. The words flowed from my brain to my lips, but they wouldn't open to let the sound out. I closed my eyes, hoping this was all just a dream. That was when the ringing in my ears disappeared, and I could hear Maroon 5's This Love on the radio. I was curious, so I opened my eyes. Once again, motionless, staring at the ceiling, ringing in my ears. Couldn't hear the radio. Closed my eyes, still motionless, but I could hear the end of This Love. I tried opening and closing my eyes a few more times, with the same results. I willed myself to move. I could feel my body turn over the edge of the bed, and I could feel it falling over. I braced for the impact on the ground, but it never came. I was back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. I tried a couple more times to roll over the bed, and I continued to experience falling off the bed. Only when I felt I reached the floor, I was back in bed again. I was exhausted, so I closed my eyes, trying to ignore all of this. Yeah, by Usher was playing. I was crying. I could feel the tears rolling down my cheeks, but I could not move. Suddenly, somebody yelled out my name, close to my right ear. Not my American name, but my Vietnamese name. That startled me, and by reflex, I sat right up from the bed, out of my paralysis. That was my first sleep paralysis experience. One of many in my life, with many seemingly supernatural experiences. I've grown older now, and discovered I have severe sleep apnea. When I did the sleep study, the sleep tech said I have 72 apneic events/HR. That means in 1 hour, I stopped breathing 72 times. Ever since using the CPAP to push air into my lungs, clearing whatever blockage I have in my airway, my brain gets more oxygen and the sleep paralysis stopped. Until last month, when I had a sleep paralysis episode again. Luckily this time, there was no auditory or visual hallucination. I got to talk to my respiratory therapist about increasing the air pressure for my CPAP. When I was 11, me and a friend were swimming in an inside swimming pool. We were just minding our own businesses when suddenly a man appeared. I was a very shy and chubby kid, so talking to strangers was a stressful thing to me. I get very nervous and just blabber some shit the whole time, so the man appeared and spoke in very bad German. I'm from Germany lol, to us something about diving with him. Not able to process fast enough what exactly could happen, and being young and naive I just said yes. He told me he'd count to 3, and then we have to go underwater. I was a really good swimmer and could easily swim to the bottom of the 2.40 centimeter pool. When he counted to 3 I did just that, and he followed me really closely. While going down he grabbed my boobs really hard. So hard that it hurt me. I was shocked and just tried to push myself to the surface as fast as I could to get away from him. But while I was going up he grabbed my intim parts so hard his fingers went in for a second through my swimsuit. When I got to the surface my friend just looked blankly at me as I hurried over to her. I remember trying to shield her from him, slowly processing what happened while pushing her back. I just looked awkwardly at the man and said something like, haha, we have to go now, bye, with a fake grin. I don't know why I did that. The moment was just too much for me. We got out of the water and I told my friend what happened. She just looked at me and said that she didn't know what to do, but maybe tell the lifeguards. So we went to them and I told them what happened. And I shit you not, this guy just looked at this overwhelmed 11 years old and told us, I don't believe someone would ever want to touch you, ugly fat kid. I was shocked and said nothing, not knowing what to do, and my friend just pushed me away to the cabins. I was getting bullied at school a lot since elementary, so that words weren't really new to me, but never has a grown-up talked to me like that. We dressed ourselves in complete silence, not talking, because we were 11 years old and too freaking young to process anything that just happened. I was diagnosed with depression at a really young age, 7 or 8 I think, so the words the lifeguard said to me sounded plausible and rational, because I freaking hated myself, lol. So I didn't question it, or the whole freaking situation, until I was like 17 and randomly remembered it. IDKY, but every time I think back to that happening I feel deeply ashamed, and I'm not talking about the lifeguard thing, but that man touching me. This story feels really weird to tell, and I never did until now, but I feel a little relieved now that I have. So TLDR was 11 and touched by a man in the swimming pool. Lifeguard told me I was too ugly for that, and I still have trust issues with men. When I was a junior as high school, me and a fairly large group of friends had found a nice place in the middle of nowhere to jet away, get drunk, smoke joints, etc. Lived in a small town in the country. Everybody knew everybody, so if you were going to ditch the family for the night, every friend involved had to be on the same page. No holes in the story meant every parent was at ease thinking we were safe and sound at whoever's house. Usually whoever was the kid that had the weird parents that no other parent wanted to talk to worked every time. Now, this one fateful night, we met up for our usual bonfire, smoke, and drink sesh. Everything went great. Pretty large crowd this time. Maybe about 15 to 20, so we had to be extra careful. Night starts to come to a close. All the drunk teenagers start driving off the field heading back to their respective bunkers to sleep off the drunk before they go home to their parents. Night's done. Not the one for the books. Woke up the next morning, heading home, and said my usual hellos to my rents. I told them the usual, I had a great time at whoever's house again, blah blah blah. Then the moment comes, so did you hear about Mr. Lambert's field? I froze. I hesitantly say no and ask what happened. They proceed to tell me that apparently 20 acres of land and crops of his had burnt completely to a crisp overnight, and the only thing they found was the remnants of a Guitar Hero guitar in what looked to be a fire pit. Holy frick. Come to find out, my good buddy Tan, as drunk as decided as he was the last to leave, to go ahead and toss his Guitar Hero guitar in the back of his truck into the embers for good measure. Apparently those embers sparked back up, and that guitar ripped one last glorious fire-breathing solo for the ages. Fire marshals and the motherfricking FBI started knocking on all of our doors. Somebody had to pay. To all of our surprise, not one kid cracked, not one kid told their parents, and not one fire marshal ever figured out how the frick that happened. I've still never told anyone other than the people that were there, and from the people I still keep in touch with from that night, neither have they. All in all, we destroyed God knows how much money in crops for a very well-liked Mr. Lambert and the community. Probably should been in juvenile detention for some time, but got out free as a bird. Key takeaway here, loyal friends go a long way. The story is not my own, but that of one Lyman Bostock Jr. I stumbled across the story a while ago, and haven't had the chance to share it with anyone, so here goes. Lyman Bostock Jr. was the son of a Negro Leagues baseball player, and even though his father was absent for the majority of his childhood, he sought the same career path as Bostock Sr. He grew up in Gary, Indiana before moving to Los Angeles at the age of 8, never losing that drive to take part in the great American pastime. Then soon after the move, his mother bought him a baseball glove. The next day it got stolen. His mom couldn't afford to replace it, seemingly killing the dream. Thankfully, a friend of hers gave him their glove, and even though it was left-handed, the right-handed Bostock figured out how to use it, because it was all he had. This caused him to make more underhanded catches, since the technique was easier for him to use given the handicap. It would become a token of his fielding throughout his career. Jumping forward a bit, Bostock played in the outfield for Cal State Northridge in college, and after hitting .296 his senior season, he was drafted by the Minnesota Twins in the 26th round of the 1972 MLB draft. Even though he was 15 credits from finishing his degree, Bostock decided to pursue his dream and join the organization. He started in single A ball, 3 levels below the major leagues. The next couple years saw him move up to Double A and Triple A. While most people struggle once they move up a level, Bostock seemed to get better, hitting .294 in single A in 1972, .313 in Double A the next year, and .333 in Triple A the year after. Then in 1975, he was hitting .391 after a month in Triple A, and the Twins took notice, calling him up to the MLB. Lyman Bostock played center field for the Twins for the rest of the season, hitting .282 and doing well enough to stay in the clubhouse. His first full year in the majors came in 1976 when he hit .323, finishing with the 4th best batting average behind, among others, his teammate Rod Carew. The next year he'd up his average to .336, this time finishing second in batting average. He still didn't have the best average on his team, as future Hall of Famer Carew hit an astounding .388 on his way to an MVP award that 1977 season. He was still beloved by fans and teammates for the part he played on the Twins and the basket catches that trademarked his center field presence. The next year, after hitting the newly created free agency market, Bostock would experience a great deal of change. This part may require a bit of background. Free agency was still a new concept in the late 70s, having been around for only a couple years. Generally, the way it had worked was that the men who owned baseball teams paid their players the salary that they set, and the players would suck it up and deal with the pennies they were dealt, while the owners raked in cash from tickets. If the players got traded, so be it. If they didn't want to play for the team they were on, they had to find another job that wasn't baseball. That was how it worked for almost 100 years. It all changed when Curt Flood tried to refuse a trade from the street Louis Cardinals to the Philadelphia Phillies in 1969. He didn't want to go from a team that had just been in the World Series to a team that had just lost over 60% of their games. His desire found its way to the court, and in light of the case Flood vs. Kuhn, Bowie Kuhn was the head of the MLB at the time, free agency was implemented. Instead of having to deal with minimal returns for the effort they put in, players could sell their services to the highest bidder and earn a great deal more money. Thus, when the 1977 off-season rolled around, after Lyman Bostock did not sign a new contract with the Minnesota Twins, he became a free agent. After some rumors that he would go to the New York Yankees, Bostock ended up signing for 6 years and $2.3 million with the California Angels. He signed that contract after making $20,000 for the Twins the year prior. It was one of the first true big money free agent contracts, and given his pedigree, Bostock deserved every penny of it. Oddly enough, there were times he didn't seem to think so. After batting a paltry .150 in his first month in an Angels uniform, Bostock tried to return his salary for that month, saying he hadn't earned it. His salary that month was over $10,000 more than all the money he made the previous year. He was unsuccessful his quest to not get paid, but picked it up, finishing the year with a .296 batting average and the most hits on his team. His team also turned out to be very good that year, falling just short of the playoffs, but setting a franchise record 4 wins in a season. Bostock even appeared on a couple ballots for the 1978 MVP award. He wouldn't get to see them. On September 23rd, the California Angels were all but eliminated from the playoffs, and Lyman Bostock grounded out to be the last out of a close loss to the Chicago White Sox. The game took place in Chicago, which was less than an hour from Gary, where several members of his family lived. Bostock left the game to go see them, meeting his uncle and a friend from his teenage years, who was living with her. After having a good time, his uncle agreed to drive them to his friend's cousin's house. Seated with his friend's sister in the backseat, Bostock was unaware of her situation. She had been living with her sister after being estranged from her husband, who had been following them ever since they first got in the car. The husband believed Bostock to be a man with whom his wife was having an affair, even though they had only met that day. Nevertheless, while the car Bostock was in was stopped at a traffic light, the husband pulled up beside them, rolled down his window, and fired a shotgun into the car. His shot was intended for his wife, but because she was seated on the other side of Bostock, the shot did not reach her, instead hitting Bostock square in the right temple. He would die 2 hours later in hospital. He was 27 years old. Lyman Bostock probably wouldn't be a Hall of Famer if he was alive today, but the reality is we will never know for sure. It really hit home how a misunderstanding cut such a promising career and life so short. His story and journey to the majors were both quite unique and inspired many around him, and it all vanished in the blink of an eye. I don't see anybody talking about Bostock much anymore, but his story is still worth telling, and I've never been able to do it until now, so there's that. When I was 21, I was trying out that whole being a responsible adult, paying your own bills, etc dance, and for a while it was working out pretty well. Eventually though, I lost my job through some BS corporate restructuring, and it put me in a pretty bad place financially. Now I'm too proud to ask my family for bill money, right? And after a month or so of trying and failing to get a job, I take up shoplifting electronics and flipping them to make ends meet because I'm young and dumb and can't see how this could ever backfire. After a while of this, I start stealing food too, because what the hell, in for a penny in for a pound, right? Well, one night, about 1 or 2 in the morning, I decide I want to get some cereal and some sinus medicine, and of course I'm not gonna pay for it. Something unprecedented, and also somehow incredibly predictable happens this particular night, and a police officer stops me on my way out of the store asking what's under my jacket. I tell him to get his hands off me, he pins me to a wall, and proceeds to spend 30 minutes tearing me a new one for ruining my life over $10 worth of merchandise, of course not knowing the $2K $3K worth of electronics I've jacked over the past few months. So there I am, sitting in the back of a cruiser, thinking this is it, my life is over, blah blah blah, when the officer comes back from inside the store with the manager, pulls me out, and basically tells me that I'm a dumbass, but he didn't want to ruin me over it, and the manager agreed not to press charges if I just never came back to that store. Then they tell me that it's not a crime to be down on your luck, next time to just ask for help, and they hand my grocery bag with the cereal, a loaf of bread, and the sinus medicine, and they take my handcuffs off and tell me to frick off. But then, the kicker of the whole story, as I'm walking away, this cop calls me back over and asks how old I am, and I'm freaking out now, right? But I tell him I'm 21. Then this cop opens his trunk, pulls out a beer, hands it to me, and says, I think you need this too. Now get the frick out of here, and I ride off into the sunset, straighten up my ways, and have been walking the straight and narrow ever since. TLDR, how friends possibly saved my life. I grew up with divorced parents, my father having primary custody. They lived in the same town for most of my childhood, so every weekday my sister and I would go to our mother's after school, stay there for dinner, and then she would drive us back to our dad's. Part of our routine involved watching whatever sitcoms were on the 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. loop together. In 7th grade my mother moved to another town, about a 20-minute drive from dad, that involved crossing a highway bridge over the bay. We still kept the same routine, and the sitcoms became almost a timer for when it was time to leave. Once the second episode of Friends was over, we knew that meant to get ready and go. My mom liked to be on the road promptly at 8, but my sister always insisted that we wait until we had seen the funny ending, the little clip during the credits that brings you right to the hour or half-hour mark, even though it made us late by 5 to 10 minutes. Anyway, one night we are at mom's, watching Friends. As per usual, the second episode starts to end, and mom starts making noise about leaving. My sister says, no, we have to see the funny ending. So we wait for the funny ending, gather up our things, and get on the road around 8:05. As we approach the exit ramp to the bridge, we see cop cars and a long line of cars waiting to get on the highway. It takes a while, but we finally get to where there's an officer, and my mom asks what's going on. It's now almost 8:30. He tells us that at 8:05, a woman had driven the wrong way on the highway, and as she was crossing the bridge, collided head-on with another car. No one survived. It was a huge, tragic story, and if we hadn't waited for the funny ending, we would have been one of the cars on that bridge. TLDR, my mom became part of a performance-altering substance supply chain for the whiskey a go-go. My great-grandfather opened a dry goods store in the middle of nowhere. We live on a farm in Montana, and my mother continued to support the store and would order and buy items by the case. During the late 80s, between being a Top Gun pilot and a Planeteer, the attainable goal was to be a glam rock star. I know many that tried and failed, but one of the most successful was my brother's friend Tom. Tom was the best drummer our school ever had. He always played in local bands in school and eventually went to LA to give it a shot. He eventually got in a band that didn't require paying to play, but was actually featured at some of the top clubs. Talent was secondary to hair. He told us stories of guys that were in multiple bands that would get their hair cut, dyed, and extensions every week, just to keep their hair requirements for both their bands. Tom was half Native American, so he had long black hair which helped him. Others were desperate to keep long, teased hair. People living the life could be functionally homeless, but washing and conditioning hair was a priority. A musician could practice, wear black leather pants, but right shampoo and conditioner could make all the difference. While visiting for Christmas, Tom was telling us what life was like in LA, wild parties, and famous people. He mentioned that the best hair product discovered was a special formula that could only be obtained through veterinarians. This was the sheet. This was the difference between being Motley Crue or homeless. It was a magical elixir that could detangle the worst knots while headbanging. It was a purple bottle of mane and tail for horses. This stuff? My mom showed him a bottle she had, and he had a freak out and told he'd buy it right then and there for $20. For that, mom sold him and entire cases of both shampoo and conditioner. Upon returning to LA, Tom was the guy who had the stuff. He was selling it at premium prices, and once word got out he had customers he didn't know waking him at odd hours to buy. He had people bugging him at work. He had managers of big bands making personal visits. He made enough money to pay rent. In the spring he drove his motorcycle back to Montana and bought my mother's replacement case of shampoo and conditioner, not bothering to bring anything else on his trip. Oh, I have so many of these. Let's see. So, freshman year of high school I looked pretty damn old for my age. I had grown a full-on mountain man beard over the summer and shaved it down to a goatee by the time school started. There was this swing dancing class every Friday night I would go to. After there was an open dance / hangout that would happen. Ages from like high school to the elderly were there. One night I met this girl. We chatted every time we ran into each other as the room rotated. Spent most of the night hanging out. We were both freshmen. Talked about how intimidating trig was. I was very ahead in math. Talked about cliques. At some point the conversation steered towards being self-conscious about both being virgins. She ended up inviting me back to her place so we could lose it to each other. She was walking distance. Of course it was awkward and not great. I ended up spending the night. The next morning she woke me up. I have an anthro class in a few hours. Is your car back at the parking lot? We can walk there together. I was so confused. I don't have my license yet. I don't turn 15 for another year or so. Why do you have a weekend class? Yeah. Her face kinda dropped. Turns out she was a freshman at the local JC and living with her parents. I personally thought it was hilarious. She was mortified. The combination of me just looking older, hanging out with mostly juniors, and I guess just always being an old soul general had her thinking I was a freshman in college. Her just looking young. She was shorter than me my freshman year, and me just I guess being oblivious had me thinking she was in a different high school. My whole attitude was, what's the big deal? She skipped class and we had breakfast. That was honestly the first time I heard about statutory rape, since she had to explain to me the kind of trouble she would get into if I told anyone. We never really spoke again. She stopped coming to swing dancing. When I was 14, my best friend was always fixated on receiving male attention. She was a pretty girl, but not very confident, so she was often overlooked by guys our age. I was overlooked as well, but somehow I had a lot of self-esteem, thanks mom and dad. Because of this, she would sometimes stuff her bra or act very sexual around guys to try and get their attention, and it really got to me. So, I decided to create 2 fake Facebook and MySpace accounts, cause MySpace was still around. One was a super good looking girl and one was a hot guy. He was 14, she was 16. I stole all the pictures off the internet and created lengthy backstories for each of them. I made them both from the USA. I'm Canadian. Once these people were completely fleshed out, I told my friend that my cousin from the States saw a picture of us together and he thought she was really cute. Or my fake guy cousin rather, proceeded to talk to her every day for a week until he asked her to be his boyfriend. Cause kids are dumb, and dating online seemed romantic at the time. While acting as the guy, I made sure to really make her feel good about herself, talk her up, give her compliments about her art, her humor, her smile, her baby blue eyes, etc. I then got my fake female persona to add my friend, saying she was this guy's friend and he talked non-stop about my friend, all to make the guy seem more real. They also talked very frequently, and this girl would dish about how much this guy was into my friend, confirming his feelings and honesty. This went on for about 3 weeks, at which time she started wanting to talk on the phone, which I knew I couldn't pull off. So, I got my guy to gently break it off with her, saying that him and his family were moving to Australia for his dad's work and that with the time differences, keeping this up would be too hard. She was sad but understood. During this time, she was so happy. I could physically see how much better she was feeling about herself, and she walked a lot taller. After the breakup she remained more confident, and ended up finding a real boyfriend about a month later. They are getting married this year. TLDR, at 14 years old, I created a fake profile of a hot guy and dated my best friend online for a few weeks in order to boost her self-confidence. Sort of terrible thing to do, and I'm so lucky that my plan actually worked out. This one is a wild ride. When I was like 10 I was on a Rimka basketball team. It had some of my closest friends on it. My best friend D, my good buddy Jake, etc. Now the coach's kid Rick was a troublemaker at school, but his dad was a good coach. After every game Rick would try to get us to come over to his house and stay the night. We weren't super close with him because he was a troublemaker, so we would make up an excuse. One time Rick went to mine and Dee's mom's and asked if we could stay the night and our moms thought it was a great idea and Jake's mom also heard the conversation and said he could stay too. None of us were excited. We get to his house and we are all hanging out and start playing some video games, and Rick had some boxers on, but had toilet paper hanging out of a hole in the back of his boxers attached to his butt. Us being kids we all laughed, and he pulled it out and threw it on the ground. Never threw it in the trash. We go in and talk to his parents about how we were gonna watch a scary movie and stuff. We close the door, and Rick walks over to a wall in the hallway and starts peeing about halfway up the wall, which was about 8 feet tall. We couldn't believe what we were seeing, so we asked, and he said I'll just blame it on the dog. None of us knew what to do, so we all just in shock, walked to the living room to watch the movie. About 30 minutes into the movie his mom comes in and asked about the pee on the wall, which Rick says the dog peed on the wall. They take this husky and put him in a dog carrier about 2 sizes too small. Enough where the dog's fur is poking through the sides of it. Even more shock. The night goes on, and it's time for bed. Rick's mom says why don't Dee and I share a bed and Jake and Rick can share a bed? Frick yeah, it's my best friend. Wrong. Rick throws a fit saying he wants to stay in the living room with me and watch TV in there for a little bit more. She says no, and he throws a tantrum about it. Rick's mom finally agrees. FML. She also says now Rick, no porn, do you understand me? We are 10. I don't watch porn. What the frick is that? So we go to sleep, and about 1 AM I get woke up, and Rick is watching porn. I ask what the frick is he doing, and he says watch with him. I go to sleep on the floor, because I didn't know what was going on, and didn't want to be a part of it. Dee and Jake convince me the next morning that we should tell his parents about it. We are at the table about to eat breakfast, and Rick is still asleep. We tell his parents about the whole night. When Rick wakes up his parents ask him about it, and he starts freaking out, and his parents start licking him in the face to calm him down, telling us his psychiatrist told us to do this to calm him down. We all stand up and leave and go play basketball outside praying our moms show up quickly. They show up like an hour later, and we just grabbed our stuff, said thanks and left. We told our parents and we never had to stay the night there again. Thank God. I guess the one that's happening now. Although my boyfriend is the only one that knows the full story. Since the governor of my state and the president declared emergencies, it's been a nightmare. I'm in my 2nd semester of graduate school and currently am putting myself through it from a job on campus and a second job I work at every other weekend. The university is where my #1 support system is, between my amazing coworkers, the love for my program, and my counselor that I desperately needed and had just started seeing. When I left on spring break, I didn't realize I wouldn't be coming back because of this COVID-19 closing all the universities. Since the call was made, I've been dealing with immense anxiety and sadness. I have been completely plucked from my positive space to my toxic life at home and my second job. The university hasn't determined if student workers are allowed to work, so I could be losing money there. My parents work for the same company as I at my second job, and they just told my dad he isn't allowed to come back until further notice because they found out my brother had been overseas and is now home, and they aren't paying him a dime. He's hoping to receive unemployment, but we are not sure right now. I'm scared they'll find me, and my mom too, and we'll all be out of work. I've also been having a lot of social hardships. I'm trying to video chat with coworkers to stay in touch, but it doesn't mask other things happening in my personal life. Both my mom and my best friend haven't spoken to me in about 3 days for arguments that have reoccurred throughout our relationships. This is selfish of me to say, I know, but I know inside they aren't my fault. The only one that has been giving me the time of day right now is my boyfriend, who I see on the weekends. I don't know how I'd even make it through this without him. I've cried every single day for almost a week because I'm just so frustrated that COVID took away almost the entirety of the best parts of my life. I wish someone would have taken this seriously months ago so this didn't have to happen. I'm posting this as an attempt for some inner relief. I seriously hope anyone who reads this is healthy and is managing okay. For myself, I'm trying the best I can to see the light at the end of this long uncertain tunnel. Edit. Paragraph on 4+5. Hold on to your trip guide, because this is going to get long and weird, and this is disjointed as frick. TLDR at the bottom, if you want to understand why it's disjointed, and to rip your eyes out faster. I was a foreigner somewhere. I wanted to learn the language. I went to these language sessions with locals. Spoke a lot with a man in his 70s, an eccentric artist hippie who has time for everyone, the kind who seems like a young person resentfully trapped in an old person's body. I befriended him. Months pass. There is a tendency for a lot of men there to approach me, and I got the feeling many were not wanting to just practice their language with me as the women were not approaching me with the same enthusiasm. One learner joined and seemed to be vying for my attention, and the man in his 70s takes me to the side and mentions he thinks he has an agenda, and warns me to be careful. I give the new guy a chance as it could just be cultural differences. We talk. At some point he says how he thinks some things are weird, especially when men old enough to be a girl's grandfather are chasing after a woman. He later tries flirting with me over text, and I shoot him down, and think he must have been told to back off by my friend. I leave the country for a while. My friend and I keep in touch. He had always said, if I wanted to visit again, he has a sofa, sleeping bag, and blankets, and I would be welcome to stay. So a year passes and I do. He hands me the keys and makes a joke about me not being a prisoner. His house is full of thrift and travel items. We catch up. When I get a headache he tries some crazy new age healing sheet. For obvious reasons, this did not work. At one point he asks if a hug would help it. Now, he's a very huggy person anyway, but we are sat on the sofa, and I'm so used to guys suggesting this as an excuse to initiate much more than a hug. I turn sharp and have to ask him. This has nothing to do with sex. Absolutely nothing. Nothing to do with sex. So I choose to trust him. And hey, it's a platonic cuddle. I get my head patted, and I love platonic touch. He likes to show me lots of photos of things he's seen and places he's been. He opens up his media viewer on his tablet at one point, and there's a video of a woman masturbating. Oops. Skim past it. Lots of photos and stories. At one point, there's a picture of a gorgeous young woman. He tells me her name, says she helped out around his house a lot, and stayed with him a while back. Something about this sticks with me. I go to visit another friend at one point, who I had an unexplored connection with. We had a lot of fun, and I end up staying over. I try to call my friend to no answer, and send a text and an email to no response. I end up hanging out for the rest of the next day, and staying another night. I try contacting my friend, who still has not responded, and still isn't picking up, to let him know. I'm kind of worried, but think it must be okay. Next day, I see an email from my friend. It said if I didn't come back today, all of my stuff would be outside his house. The guy I was with agrees that this sounds weird, and wonders if this guy is projecting his non-existent relationship with his son on me. Maybe, but we are worried, so he takes me back, and as we kiss goodbye I'm overcome with this weird feeling. I try to pull him out of view of the window. I get inside and shout to no answer. I find him upstairs and he isn't really responding. When I come back downstairs, I realize all of my bags had been piled on top of each other and things had been moved. When he finally comes down, I try to talk to him and explain I tried to call but had never received a response from him, which he claims he never got from me. He's acting weird and uncommunicative like he's angry, but says the email was a joke. He then eventually says he didn't expect that I'd be going off and spending lots of time with a friend. There is a gender emphasis in this language that really emphasizes he's talking about gender. Oh, so you're jealous or something? He says he's not. I don't believe him, but I remember this guy has been alienated from his adult son for almost as long as I've been alive and think there's some issue there. She's weird, but as a serial people pleaser, I want to smooth things over and so we plan a fun day out. Things seem to be cool and he's very happy. It's the morning. He brings some fresh ginger tea. I'm tired and stretched like a cat over the sofa. He motions to sit and he lies on the sofa behind me for a cuddle. Over the course of the time we've spent together, we've cuddled in increasingly reclined positions, so I don't mind. He starts making these snuggling noises a lot, like he wants to say or do something but isn't, but is trying to draw my attention to it, and then it starts. His hand over my jumper. I freeze. Now, this is where there is some vital information needed. I was molested as a kid, and lots of people who were powerless to stop a traumatic activity respond to trauma by freezing or fawning. This is taking me over a decade into my past, and I'm starting to dissociate. I do this by staring at a wall and becoming the wall or any other inanimate object. His hand is under my jumper now. Now he's moving to take it off. He asks if I'm okay with it. I make a grunt. I can't talk. I can't express no, because to admit I don't want this feels dangerous to my trauma brain, so it overrides my ability to be direct. He takes my grunt as a yes. Now it's his mouth. Now his hand is going somewhere I don't want it. My body responds to the physical sensation, but I don't want it. I end up having an orgasm. He asks me if I want him to have his turn. I barely glance at before barely shaking my head slowly. I'm still nonverbal. What, are you egocentric or something? I say nothing. It's easier that way. I spend the rest of the time around him partly dissociated. I don't tell the guy what happened. There's more tension when I go to see another friend, another argument. I go to spend time on my own, and when I come back he tells me he thinks he's a little bit in love with me. When I go to leave, he asks me if we are better staying as friends. I say sure and snap a selfie. I never spoke to him again after I left. I went to stay with another friend and kept getting quiet and angry. He knows something happened, but I have never told him or anyone else what happened, and it's been years. I often wonder if the same thing happened to that other young woman. And here we are guys, a cautionary tale to never assume consent and to recognize that trauma and danger does not mean running away, screaming, or fighting. Many of us freeze up, and many of us learn to fawn and act normal when under threat. Get enthusiastic consent if there is any doubt or imbalance at all, or don't do it. TLDR, that time I was sexually assaulted in a 70-year-old man's home and had an orgasm, arguably and unfortunately one of the best orgasms of my life, during it, and it was all creepy as frick, and don't trust old hippies, man, and sometimes I think back and wonder at what point would people say they see what's coming, and I mostly feel nothing but sometimes I feel disgusted, and it might have happened to someone else too. 1997 8th grade. I was quiet and very shy. No words came out of my mouth unless spoken to. I joined book clubs because I preferred reading by myself during lunch instead of socializing. I was known as that weird but smart loner Asian girl. One tragic day, I was assigned with a group of popular kids for an English project. I wasn't very thrilled about it because group project equals socializing equals talking. Also, it was a big group of 6 people and I get anxiety being around that many people. They decided to have a group meeting during lunch under a big tree. Anxiety level 8/10. We sat in a circle on the grass and ate our lunch. I brought cafeteria popcorn in a brown paper bag. I was overfilled with dread when a kid suggested we take turns pitching in ideas for the project. I was just sitting there listening to these 13-year-old girls talk about getting drunk when I felt something like a small pebble fell inside my popcorn bag. I looked inside but found nothing. I looked around to see if anybody noticed anything, but they were too busy talking about their plans to get alcohol for a party, so I acted nonchalant about it. Nobody was talking about the project. Cool. I proceeded to eat my popcorn by the handful. I kept my mouth full so people don't talk to me. But of course, somebody just had to ask me for my ideas and thoughts about this project. Anxiety level 15 tenths. I pretended not to understand what he just said as I shoved popcorn in my mouth. It was mushy. It was warm, sandy, and mushy. I wanted to spit it out, but I wasn't brave enough to do it in front of these kids. I continued to act normal. I panicked inside, thinking I just ate a big bug of some sort. Then, I realized that we were surrounded by pigeons. I looked up, pigeons in the tree. I just ate pigeon sheet. A big wad of pigeon sheet. I didn't want to be laughed at, so I kept my cool. I chewed the mouthful of pigeon sheet covered popcorn a few more times to break it down small enough so that I could swallow it, and all the while keeping a straight face. Lunch bell rang and we went our separate ways. I chugged a bottle of Coke on the way to my class. I volunteered to finish the project by myself so I don't have to talk to them again. I'm cool with it. Everyone was cool with it. End of story. 23 years later, I finally have the courage to tell the story. So I've had this premise for a comic slash TV show slash video game for a while, but I haven't even found a suitable sub to post it on. That's not dead. It may not even be good, but I'm putting it out there. In the current day, an asteroid containing 4 powerful masks falls to Earth. These masks are based on the following 4 elements: fire, water, electricity, and earth, though this wouldn't make sense since there's no other Earth in space, so we'll call it Terra, which has Earth-like qualities. Our hero, who I'll refer to as H, stumbles upon the crash site and the masks magnetize to him and fuse with his being, but causes rifts from another dimension to dot throughout the Earth. H wakes up to find that each mask has its own personality and grant him the ability to use each of their 4 respective element, complete with a unique outfit. The personalities are as follows. Fire, the leader. Bold, brave, very protective of the other masks and H, and gets very angry when they are threatened, the most well balanced of the 4 masks. Water, kind, intelligent, advises against violence when possible, but hits hard when her hand is forced, grants the most stamina out of the 4 masks. Electricity, hyper, scatterbrained, grants the most speed of the 4 masks. Terror, simplistic, gruff, doesn't talk much, grants the most raw strength of the 4 masks. Along with his 2 best friends, the girl best friend who helps him keep track of his abilities, not a love interest, and the guy friend who keeps track of the rifts sprouting throughout the planet. H takes it upon himself to travel the globe and stop the monstrosities, called grifters, that are entering our world by way of these portals. As the season slash game slash etc progresses, he gets gradually better at using his abilities, using fire to wall his enemies in, water to slip between grates, electricity to hurt all foes in a wide area, terror to create small controlled twister slash earthquakes, and so on. He'll need all the experience he can get too, because there has to be someone sending all these creatures to invade Earth. After all, the Grifter leader aims to take over the entire galaxy by way of these rifts. However, his power is based on nearby grifter influence, so he himself cannot go through a portal until enough grifters are residing there. After maybe 2 seasons full of side villains and other hijinks, the leader of the grifters finally falls in battle, but not before gloating that he has other planets to take over and disappears. That's right. Where do you think the masks came from? Turns out that outside our solar system, there are 4 planets, each with intelligent life forms, based on the 4 element. When grifters started to invade these planets, these species poured their energies into their respective masks in hopes of finding a hero outside of their solar system who can save them. Seasons 3 and 4, baby. With the help of the 4 masks, H and his friends can create their own rifts, allowing them to travel to these home planets, each filled with new characters, scenery, enemies, etc. Every time H liberates a planet, as a thanks, the aliens enhance their planet's mask, allowing H to temporarily assume an extremely amped up version of that power when he wears the mask. For example, enhanced water can make H's entire body made of water, allowing shots to pass through. Enhanced terror can attract rocks to form a giant golem creature around H, stuff like that. After freeing the fourth planet, H receives word from Earth. Another asteroid has struck the planet. Seasons 5 and 6. Another 4 masks have landed on Earth. These masks are based on the following element: sound, outgoing, bombastic, very sociable. Allows H to use sound-based attacks. Poison, the edgy one, doesn't care for subtleties or cleanliness, which puts him at odds with water. Time, very intelligent, a bit pompous, grants H limited time control abilities, use clock hands as weapons. Space, considers himself to be the best of the masks, very spiritual in nature, does not get along with time. Before H can get acquainted with his new friends, they receive word that the 4 planets these masks came from are also being attacked, but much more aggressively. H does not have time to learn his new abilities here on Earth. He will have to train on site. To avoid things getting stale, perhaps some new challenges are in order. Maybe the sound species refuses H's help, or space can only become enhanced a certain way. I don't know. I can only imagine so much without writing anything down. The Grifter leader finally returns, this time more powerful than ever. He kidnaps all of H's masks, rendering him essentially powerless. In one of the hardest and most desperate missions of his life, he enters the Grifter dimension in search of his masks. After managing to rescue Fire, they eventually gather the others. After a long intense battle, which would include H using all of his powers at once at some point, H seemingly sacrifices himself to save the universe. Everyone mourns. All of the mask creators come together. Not even the masks know H's final fate. A few years go by, when Fire receives word of something incredible. H is alive, and he ended up on a supposedly uninhabited planet. H has been hiding there ever since, training under the natives, so this planet was inhabited after all. By honing his concentration and meditation skills, as well as special magic performed by the natives, he has developed psychic abilities, meaning that if he ever loses his masks again, he has more options. Hello, this is the boss. After my immensely pleasureful session this morning, I unlocked my phone and my eyes fell upon this question. After some contemplation, I have decided now could be an immaculate time to share my story. Not all of it, of course. That is for my autobiography, which I'm currently writing. Now who am I? I'm a leader. The leader of one of the most fruitful communities in the world. What community, you may ask? Cork and bull torture. I know, no need to gawk. Yes, I'm a big deal. The community is rising in power, and I will dedicate this time in my day to share with you its origins. By age 20, I wrote 4 books on cork and bull torture, all of which were highly praised. Not much you can do after that except be a freaking genius. These books helped initiate my rise in power. Before then, my interest in cork and bull torture started when I was 15 years old. My pet turtle died, and I was determined to make something of myself. Yes, I wanted to be the leader of cork and bull torture. Back then, there were no manuals, no starting guides, no trilogies on cork and bull torture. Why? Because I will have been the one to write them. Before me, the cork and bull torture space was barren and uninteresting. I made it work. I populated it with my knowledge. And now look at me. I'm the leader. I live in a penthouse in a New York City penthouse. I nurture the community. I observe its succulence, its beauty. I created that, I tell myself sometimes. That was me. So, there I was, 15 years old, having no idea where to start. It took immense trial and error. I started with chairs. I pretended that a person was sitting in it, and that there was a hole in the seat. There wasn't, of course. I was still a rookie back then. But this way, I found the right methods. Not only that, I created my first technique. It's called smack. I have created several spin-offs of the smack technique, such as smack, double layered, so don't be confused. Smack is the original. Take an object of your choice, a pole, pipe, knotted rope, butt, etc. and smack the cork and balls. I prefer flexible objects, such as a knotted rope, because they can bend and twist and it requires immense amounts of skill to pull off. Of course, at this point, I could only apply this technique to those sitting down. There are sections in the smack book dedicated to different positions, such as standing, diagonal, sideways, etc. A year later, when I was 16, I had mastered the smack. After moving on and mastering several other techniques, I needed an organization system. I created different categories, each with many different techniques. Smack is a part of one category, compress is a part of another, and so on. So far I have created over 78 different categories, with hundreds, maybe even thousands of techniques. Yes, I know, I'm freaking impressive. Anyways, I started exploring other objects and techniques. A garden hose, frying pan, toaster, car, spark plug, anything in sight. I could immediately come up with a use for it. It's just a gift I have, I guess. My family is full of engineers. We have spare parts lying around everywhere. Robots are abundant in our house. I decided that this was a fantastic opportunity to progress to the next phase in my plan. What phase was that? Well, I thought you would never ask. You see, I'm an engineer too. Some call me a scientist, an inventor, innovator, the Einstein of pleasure. Yes, that is me. At 16 I constructed my very first cork and bolt torture robot. This way, the robot could perform my own techniques on me. And then, with trial and error, I could calculate the very precise perfect calculations for maximum surface area stimulation. It took a while, but I cracked it. I found out many different things, because I could experience the pleasure for myself. And I could provide myself feedback, and adjust accordingly. After a prolonged amount of time and effort, I know how to achieve maximum pleasure. The robot has the perfect settings, perfect calculations, perfect technique, every single time. I'm quite phenomenal. I created more and more robots, each unique, each memorable. And over the years I have found out many things. What are they, you ask? Well, I have written a book on them, so I will only say some. First of all, avoid sidearm motion. This is detailed in page 452 of the smack book. If the subject is standing and facing sideways, you actually want to swing diagonally. Have your brachium and antebrachium parts of your arm form a 135-degree angle, your wrist loose but controlled. This allows for more surface area of the cork and ball to be stimulated. The only time sidearm motion is acceptable is when you have two subjects adjacent to each other. This arrangement combines the smack and compress techniques. By far, I'm most proud of my book called Rapid Fire. That is my magnum opus. It is the community's bible. Of course, you will have to join the community to access it. But I assure you, it is important. It is fruitful. It is immense. So, now you know. I'm a freaking big deal. I'm a warrior. I will lead the revolution. The cork and ball torture war is coming. We are preparing. We are reviewing the techniques, the predictions, the weapons. The enthusiasts will rise one day, and the non-enthusiasts will perish. We are ready for the war. Are you? Alright. My brother used to be quite a delinquent, and had a lot of run-ins with the law. He used to sell drugs, get addicted to drugs, and had been in jail a few times for a short while. He's a good guy though in the end. He would never hurt anyone for no reason, but he could be quite intimidating. Eventually he'd get his life in order. He quit drugs, go to rehab, he found a good job, and had a kid with his girlfriend. Over the years we had been very close sometimes and a bit distant sometimes. I got myself an apartment thanks to my mom, and started moving in. He kept scheduling to help or come see my apartment, but bailed 3 times, just before we arranged to meet. This quite upset me. So the next time we actually scheduled it was already late, so I assumed he wouldn't come, and met up with a girlfriend. Then he showed up, and wondered why I wasn't there. We didn't get into a fight or anything, but it didn't feel right. My birthday was a few days later, and he would come on my birthday. But most of my friends bailed, so I didn't want to host a party. Therefore I sent him that he should go to my sister, who's my twin, instead, and that I'd meet him there. A few days later I got a call from my sister at 7 a.m. when I was preparing to go to work saying he got into an accident and that police had arrived at my mom's home. The police basically told them that it was an accident and no more. Turns out my brother was in a coma because he was fleeing a shooting in a getaway car. Some guy owed him some money. He really needed it because apparently he had a relapse which my mom knew about but refused to tell. He went to the place with a friend. His friend shot through the mailbox and hurt the guy. My brother and his friend fled the scene. Police ended up seeing them. My brother jumped out of the car and hit his head hard. He died the next day. It was only $80. It hurt so much to see my mom and everyone in denial. The police being there aggravated everything too. I know he shouldn't have done what he did, and he was no saint, but still. I couldn't even say anything at work because they kept talking about it. It was all over the news, and they were judging him and talking shit while not even knowing it was my brother. Life can be ridiculous sometimes. A few years back I went with my parents to a crematorium to pay respects to my deceased grandfather. The staff there kept the columbarium very well maintained and adorned every single grave with beautiful flowers. After the visit, my family prepared to leave, and I lagged behind. A thing you should know is that firstly, I'm an artist who is easily captivated by things of beauty, and that secondly, I'm a numbskull with little social awareness and sense of etiquette. For some reason, I found one of the flowers there really entrancing, and I pulled out my phone to take a picture. What I didn't realize until later, however, was that the details of the deceased person were also captured in the picture. Suddenly, my phone camera began vibrating violently, not the phone. I was holding my phone, so I could tell, and the camera was vibrating the area of the phone case around it loudly, and ultimately prevented me from taking the picture. I also suddenly felt this presence over me, and I quickly sprinted to join back with my family. Now for the most part of my life I didn't, and still don't really believe in the supernatural, but in that incident I was sure that I had angered someone or something. After the incident, my phone camera began to deteriorate rapidly, vibrating whenever it was in use, until it finally stopped working. The only person whom I've told this story to is my grandmother, partially because she's the kindest, least judgmental soul I know, and also because I felt the story was somehow relevant to her, although it really isn't. Now that I think about it, she has me half convinced that something supernatural occurred, and that it wasn't pure coincidence. I've changed phones, and haven't looked back on that incident since. So I will preface this with a small backstory. I'm a crossdresser and super highly closeted trans. My family is the kind that would disown me if they found out, and I'm not in the position to officially come out. I don't do it often anymore, but at the time of this story it was common that I was in private and dressed in a skirt, stockings and a blouse with a few extra things I had to put on a more feminine touch. Well, I was at the time part of a night crew, so my hours were usually 9 PM to 11 AM awake, so no one is ever awake when I am. I also have an affinity for sharp objects. I know all the makings of a psycho. So it's about 4 AM. I'm currently wearing my private attire, and I'm looking at two knives that I had recently purchased. I take the one I think looks dull, and decide to test it. I take a note card and end up having to chop through it. The blade is better for chopping, so I absent-mindedly start chopping the pieces smaller and smaller. I do this to about 5 note cards. When I think I just realized this is super dangerous, then I say aloud, while holding a piece of note card that is about 1x1 inch, one more couldn't hurt. One more did hurt. One more turned into 5 stitches. One more can always hurt. It felt like a dream. I chopped to the bone. In that moment I realized how lucky I was that I was using the dull one. So here I'm alone on the floor of my bathroom, TP wrapped around my finger in a skirt and blouse, plus others, thinking that I'm super screwed. My secret is about to get out. I'm lonely now, but my family is about to disown me. The medical bills are going to be through the roof. I'm probably gonna lose my fingertip. My secret is about to get out. My life is over because I was being stupid. I'm about ready to cry when I remember that I have an extensive first aid kit from my phase, where I was always carrying a first aid kit, fake plastic skull and model brain in high school. I know all the makings of a psycho. So I hop up and find it quickly, and using the skills that I got in the sports medicine class, I carefully washed out and bandaged my poor finger. I ended up actually being able to change and hide my secret before my grandparents, who I was living with at the time, woke up. My grandmother brought me to an urgent care, 5 stitches. The cost was pretty low. I got time off of work and I proceeded to tell a variation of the story instead of the truth. Sorry it was so long, and while technically I've been able to tell it, I haven't been able to fully reveal the whole situation I got myself into, and it feels good to tell it. Probably going to get buried, but I was at my cousin's birthday last year, and to be fair, going bowling near midnight isn't always the best ideas in the world, but we'd all been drinking, and were hoping to just have some fun. Figured why not. Got a ride to the place, some township outside of DC, and it was a hole in the wall, really cheesy place straight out of the 80s, and seemed to have last been cleaned then too. No joke, at the shoe check-in counter, a roach crawled across the counter. I was getting tired, so I decided all I wanted to do was watch some people have fun and drink some cheap beer, enjoy some conversation. Stood in line and waited for the person in front of me to order, and then ordered a pitcher from the same tap. At least then he'd be somewhat washed out. Anyway, they're throwing some balls at some pins, and the night moves on. It's the end of the night that's the interesting part. If you've ever seen The Big Lebowski, I met Walter that night. He was shorter though, but still had the build of an early 90s John Goodman. He had the beard, the khaki vest, a red beret on his head, and even the aviators. I'm talking full getup with boots to match. Yes, the aviators at near 2 AM at this point. We are packing up to head out, and I see this guy and another employee clearing the tables, throwing some balls at pins to clear out the retrieval, and they're hitting strikes at each lane. So, offhandedly, I said I'd like to see these guys play an actual match. I'm sure it'd be something. And Walter hears me. He tells me about the other employee, and he used to coach him. I don't remember names at this point, but he said he used to play professionally and settled here for some reason or another. Then he asks me, what hand do you use to throw? Now I had never heard of bowling as throwing, but I said with my right hand. Then he tells me when you throw, you need to be graceful, like this, and he poses, right arm outstretched towards the pins at the end of the lane, left arm and leg pointing behind him, toes straight out like a ballerina, back parallel to the ground. I swear he could have been a cherub on a fountain spitting water from his nose. And you need to look at the pins when you throw. Don't pay attention to the dots in the lane. Aim for the pins, as if you were aiming with a rifle. Maybe not his exact words. I was a pitcher and a couple mixed drinks in at this point, though over the course of a few hours, when you throw, you want to look like a Greek god when you release the ball. After seeing me drunk talking with this caricature out of a movie for less than a minute, my cousin tried to help me escape my slack-jawed stupor that this character actually exists somewhere. I just went along outside the place, still in shock, after trying to tell him a polite goodbye. When I was 20, me and my friend were driving home during a pretty bad ice storm. We were both way too drunk to be on the road. I know, we were young and dumb. We were both broke and wanted more to drink. We passed by a local liquor store and came to the drunk conclusion that, since the power was out around town, ice storm had knocked it out, that it must mean that the alarm systems wouldn't work either. We then proceeded to drive up to the side of the strip mall it was in and park. I took a crowbar out of the back, and we went up to the front, which was entirely big glass windows. I took a deep breath, and broke the window, and the alarm immediately sounded. We still stupidly went in, and made about 5 trips each back and forth. The entire time slipping and falling all over the place. Both on broken bottles, and spilled liquor we had knocked over, and on the ice outside. We managed to make our way back to the truck and hop in, a 64 Ford that had the pipes cut off, real smart choice in getaway vehicle, and take off down the road, until I realize I left the crowbar at the front of the store, that I had used with no gloves. We drive back to the strip mall, and do a drive-by, and don't see any cops yet. I hop out around the corner and run over, and grab the crowbar and haul us back to the truck. As we get on the access ramp to the highway heading home, we see cops heading down the main street behind us. We managed to get away with thousands in expensive liquor, mostly whiskey and scotch. Woke up the next morning and fully expected the cops to be at our door at any moment. Spent the next week locked in our apartment, watching the news, getting stoned and drinking copious amounts of whiskey. Figured we may as well enjoy it if we were going to jail. No one ever showed up, nothing on the news, and never heard another word about it. Still to this day the most idiotic and craziest thing I have or will ever do. I'll start by saying I never tell this story because people often don't believe me or they somehow make me feel terrible about it. I also still have anxiety and panic attacks when I think about that time in my life. I'll try to share it as best I can. Sorry it's so long. To help organize my thoughts better I'll refer to my brothers as Tom, Dick, and Harry. When I was 15 my mom moved into her boyfriend's house and my dad lived in an apartment somewhere. She left me and my 3 brothers to live in a house all by ourselves and we basically did whatever we wanted. I have 2 older brothers, Tom, a 21 years old high school dropout, and Dick, he's only 1.5 years older than me, and 1 younger brother, Harry, he was 9 or 10 at the time. My mom didn't really care what we did, so we had keg parties every weekend. We had bongs and pipes all over the house, strictly used for pot. We didn't do any hard drugs. Anyway, as you can imagine, leaving kids our age to fend for ourselves lead to things getting out of control. Tom and Dick started having parties during the week and would often stay up all night getting wasted with a stereo blasting and talking super loud like drunk people do. Now I won't lie, I participated in the parties as well, but usually only on the weekends. When things got too loud my Harry would get scared and come into my room crying. I would do my best to comfort him and try to get Tom and Dick to turn the music down and let us sleep. Well, they didn't like that. Tom would call me all sorts of names, make fun of me, throw beer at me, and sometimes punch me or throw me on the ground. It got to the point where I became super depressed and began having panic attacks. I had a job and tried to pick up as many shifts as possible to avoid being home. That turned out to make my life worse. When my dad moved out, he left his old car for me to have when I turned 16. One night, while I was at work, I usually worked until 11 PM or midnight, Tom and Dick got drunk and took a sledgehammer to the car. I told my mom, but she did nothing and told me to stop whining. It didn't stop there. Another night, Dick got mad at me for something I genuinely didn't do. We got into a big fight about it, and Dick lifted me above his head and threw me into the bed of his truck. Tom laughed and called me names the whole time. At this point, obviously, I was scared of my brothers. My bedroom door was locked at all times. A couple of weeks later, while I was staying the night with a friend, Tom and Dick broke the lock on my bedroom door, stole all my posters and pictures on my walls, and burned them in a fire in the backyard. When I got home the next morning, I asked what happened to everything on my walls, and they told me they had no idea, must have been someone else. I didn't actually find out the truth about that until a year or so later. I replaced my lock, but I figured it was probably useless. About a month after that incident, I confronted Tom and Dick with a sincere, heartfelt speech. I was scared and emotional and crying the whole time. When I finished my speech they laughed and continued to call me names and berate me for being too weak. I lost it. I started screaming at them. I could tell they were getting angry. I got scared and ran to my room and locked my door. They chased me and began trying to knock my door down. They were successful. They knocked the door totally out of the frame and broke part of the frame in the process. I was huddled in the corner crying. They just laughed and went back to their drinking. I told my mom and she just told my brothers that they had to buy me a new door. To my surprise, they actually did buy a new door. However, they refused to help me install it. My mom said she couldn't force them to help and to figure it out myself. At that age I was 5 feet 4 inches and 115 pounds or so. So, you can imagine that installing a door was not really something I could just figure out. For a week or two I only had a blanket hanging over the door frame. I was depressed and unbelievably anxious all the time. I finally reached out to my uncle who lived nearby and asked for his help with the door. He dropped everything to come install the door for me. He kept telling me that I should go stay with him, my aunt, and my cousins. I didn't want to lose the freedom that I had so I stupidly stayed with my brothers until I finished high school. After high school I was accepted into college and I couldn't afford to move out while paying all my college expenses by myself. My grants and scholarships were only enough to cover tuition and books, gas money, food, and helping pay bills at the house had me broke. I finally took my aunt and uncle on their offer for me to stay with them. It was possibly the best years of my life living with them. They actually had family dinner every night. They were so wholesome, and I was treated like I was their daughter. My aunt and uncle still claim that I'm their kid, even though I'm 33 now. I ended up graduating with honors and moving out on my own. I forgave my family and we are now all pretty close. Every time I look at my son, he's 3, I'm reminded of what I went through and how I would do anything to make sure he has the happiest childhood/teenage years that my husband and I can provide. I've been very lucky, always been able to get stuff off my chest, but there is one I've never been able to tell, and I'm finally ready. This is about the abuse I faced at the hands of my uncle. Please exercise caution if you wish to read further. I was born in mid-2001. My mum had a very difficult pregnancy with me, and eventually I was born 1 month early after my mum had a partial placenta eruption. We both recovered, but it was clear for the offset I was going to be unwell 4 hours. After I was born I had my first seizure. This meant I needed round-the-clock care. After 2 years my mum had to go back to work, so my aunt and uncle took care of me during the day. This arrangement worked really well until my uncle started to develop an interest in me when I was around 6. My mum and dad still worked, and my aunt was a nurse and often did night shifts. So I would go to school, and my uncle would pick me up and look after me from about 3 PM to 6 PM when my mum would pick me up. I loved spending time with my aunt and uncle so much, so I liked to go to Thiz on the weekend from ages 6 to 13. Everything was normal, except it wasn't. My uncle was sexually abusing me using my trusting ways for his sick advantage. It started with touching. As I got old it involved sex. He told me this was normal, that everyone did it, but our I was so special to him. He didn't want my family to be jealous, so I couldn't tell anyone. Why wouldn't I trust him? He was my uncle, he'd looked after me for years. I can remember on nights I stayed over, him coming and laying down next to me and telling me not to cry, that as I get older it won't hurt as much. What he didn't count on was us being taught about sex in school and being taught what rape was. Slowly I put it together in my head. I can remember searching about what it was he was doing to me on my 3Ds, which had internet access, and later my Kindle. I didn't know how to cope or who to tell until one day I was in PE and I had to wear shorts because I couldn't find my leggings that morning. My PE teacher saw that I was cutting and I was sat down with the school counselor when I broke into everything. Finally I was free. He pled guilty, all charges brought against him, and he was given life. My aunt never knew what was happening, nor did my parents. They all feel so guilty, which makes me feel horrible. I hope he rots in hell. I never got to be child because of him, and what he did to me at 18. I'm only just being able to be proud of my body and have a healthy relationship with myself. But it's hard. I hope one day I will be able to look him in the eyes and beat the shit out of him. I don't believe in the death penalty. I think people like him should be locked away and left to rot. When I was in college, I worked as a waitress at a drive-in restaurant to pay my way through school. The restaurant was a local hangout for high school kids and recent high school graduates, and they were constantly causing trouble. At one point, one of the 17-year-old guys brought a cattle prod to the lot and started chasing people around with it. Anyway, there was one particular guy, he was about 19 years old, who constantly made me feel uncomfortable. He would wolf whistle at me from across the lot, make inappropriate comments on my body, etc. Every time I had to deliver food to his car, his friends would chant smash, smash, smash. He would linger in the lot by himself after the restaurant closed. While I would sweep the lot and clean up, he would ask me what time I was getting off work, etc. He made me so uncomfortable, and it got to the point that any time I heard someone whistle, my body would physically react. My heart would pound, and I would start to shake. One day I got off work and climbed into my truck to leave, and suddenly the passenger door opened. The guy climbed into my truck with me and started talking. I don't remember what all he said. All I could think about was how to reach the pistol hiding behind my seat before he could reach me. I had a small box on the bench seat between us, and the guy asked if he could move it. I told him I would prefer that he didn't, and asked him to get out of my vehicle. He ignored me and started to move the box, saying it was in his way. I panicked and told him I had to go back in and check my schedule for the next week. I jumped out of my truck, leaving him in it, and ran back into the restaurant. I told my manager what happened, and he called the police. The police officer who reported asked what I wanted to do. I told him I wanted to file a restraining order. The officer told me that the guy was just a 19-year-old kid, and if I tried to press charges or get a restraining order, I would be ruining his life. So I didn't do it. I didn't do anything. I didn't want to be the reason someone's life was ruined. I let it go and continued to feel uncomfortable at my job. I never saw the kid again, but his friends still came every night, and I was constantly afraid that he would come back. At the same time that all of this was going on, I had a coworker who would make comments on how I looked, send me messages over social media, etc. I asked him to stop and told him I wasn't interested in him in that way, but he continued anyway. The one day, I was in a back room changing a trash bag by myself. When I bent over, I suddenly felt hands around my waist. My coworker had come up behind me and was pressing himself against me. I stood up quickly, and he laughed and said, "You're just so pretty," and walked away. I immediately told the manager on duty, and he reported it to the general manager. The next day, the general manager asked to speak with me. He took me to a back room and asked what happened. I explained. He looked at me for a second, then asked, "Are you sure you want to report this?" I asked what he meant. He proceeded to tell me that the coworker already had trouble with the law. He was an 18-year-old, and if I made the manager officially report this, the coworker would probably never be able to get a job again. I would be ruining his life. I was confused and asked if there was a way to stop working with the guy without officially reporting. The manager said he would schedule us for opposite shifts. I accepted that and decided not to report. Again, I didn't want to be the reason someone's life was ruined. The manager didn't keep to his word and continued to schedule us during the same shifts. About 6 months later, I was having some trouble with my truck. It wouldn't start one night after work. A different coworker, a guy I was becoming friends with, told me he would give me a ride home. My apartment was about 2 miles away, and I would have to walk through a neighborhood with a resident sex offender in order to get there. I was grateful for the offer and accepted. Halfway to my apartment, he pulled onto a side street and stopped the car. He raped me and then dropped me off at my apartment. At this point, I ran out of steam. I didn't report it because when I reported everything else, nothing happened. I thought it must have been my fault, and if I reported, I would be ruining his life. The reason my mom left my dad. My mom and I have been very close my entire life. In my early 20s, I started seeing signs that mom was unhappy being with my dad. She touched on some things that he did that she couldn't stand anymore. Lack of attention, affection, and his general attitude towards everything to do with the family. She told me she wasn't happy and she thought she needed a break. I told her she should because I was thinking time away might help my dad realize his mistakes. Maybe she take a trip to visit some newly discovered family we had come to know. Longer story. Well, 2 weeks later I was out with a friend. We are hanging out, playing video games for a couple hours, when I realized my cell phone was out in the car. I get it, only to see I have 17 missed calls from my dad. No messages. I called back, and he was in a panic saying mom was gone. She up and left. Wrote him a note telling him everything, and that she was actually leaving him for another man. Needless to say, I felt like I was kicked in the balls 100 times over. I had no idea about another guy in her life when we discussed her taking a break. My dad, always a pillar of stoic strength, was broken. A literal quivering, sobbing hull of the man I knew my entire life. He went into a deep depression, had a minor heart attack, nearly ruined himself financially, and was threatened with legal actions by mom for stalking and harassment. My little brother ended up severely traumatized, falling into a pattern of drug and alcohol abuse, mental health issues, and a total change in his personality. After 6 months, my mom came home. That's a really long story in itself. But after a few years, my mom and I revisited the whole ordeal. She told me the only reason she actually left and went along with the other guy was because I seemed okay with her leaving. That she wasn't sure she should go, but I helped convince her. She wouldn't have left if it said she should stay. She felt that my being okay with the break was understanding what she meant by it all. I've carried the weight of all that damage that caused. Much has gone back to normal over the last 15 years, but the effects still show themselves. Mainly in my brother. He's battled the demons from all of that shit ever since. He's put his life together. But after a lot of hardship. And I feel pretty responsible for it all to this day. For what it's worth, you are not responsible for the decisions of competent adults, nor are you responsible for the outcome of those decisions. Everyone owns their own shit and your mother had no right putting that on you. I suppose that if you'd said, you can't afford to leave, mom, you should totally rob a bank, it would have been your fault that she robbed a bank? Oh, wait. She wouldn't have done that, right? She left because she'd been having an affair and thinking of leaving for a long time. She used your lack of specific objection as an excuse to justify it to herself. To shift blame by suggesting otherwise is mindfuckery of the highest order. Shame on her. Do not allow others to screw with your head. We humans are quite good enough at doing it to ourselves. My father, when I was 18, told me that he was going to ask his GF to marry him. He asked what I thought. What I thought was that there was something fake about her. They were too vastly different to be well suited, and, frankly, that I didn't like her one bit. I didn't, however, have any specific red flags that I could point out. What I said was, Dad, I'm 18. It doesn't matter what I think. If you love her, marry her. What followed was a complete train wreck that cost him more than half of what he had going into the 5-year marriage and could have ruined his health. Dad had been army and was blood type O. He continued to donate like clockwork after leaving the service. Suddenly, he tested positive for Hep C, never had a tattoo, used fourth drugs, or cheated. She cheated and brought it home. Do I wish that I'd said something more like, Dad, I just don't see it. Are you sure? Of course. Who knows, maybe he'd have slowed down, and it would have been obvious that he shouldn't marry her before it happened, rather than within months after the wedding. Maybe it wouldn't have changed anything. But here's the important part. Dad was an adult. It was his decision to make, and he made it. I was not responsible for his choices any more than you were for your mother's. TLDR, part of being an adult is owning our own choices. We have no obligation to accept ownership of choices made by others. Don't let her make you feel responsible for hers. This is an old story from when I was in high school in the early 1980s. TLDR, when a kid in high school, I had a man confess to a murder and didn't know what to do about it. I had a project to interview a real research scientist. My father happens to be a research scientist, but I thought it was lame to interview my own father. So I asked him if there was any scientists he knew who would be interesting and would agree to an interview. He said, I'll see if Professor, I'll call him, will interview. He's interesting. So off I went to interview Professor A. Turns out this guy does radiation biology, that is, the effect of radiation on living organisms. So his lab was underground for shielding, down in a disused sub-basement of this university building. So even getting there was odd and creepy. I'm in the janitor's area. Am I really in the right place? I was in the right place, and this guy's lab was pretty spectacular. He had a cobalt source, a large X-ray machine, rows of rats in cages. Apparently his grad students injected some sort of radiation detection thing into the rats, let them loose near nuclear power plants, then retrieve them later to see how they absorbed radiation from their environment. All great stuff for my interview. Professor A was quite friendly. He was an elderly gentleman and quite eager to talk. In fact, I got the impression he was very glad to see some kid interested in science, or maybe he was just lonely and wanted someone to talk with. Anyway, somehow the topic shifted to his own teenage years. Back then, it was the early 1940s, and he'd been eager to volunteer for the war. He ended up as a sailor on an escort ship in the North Atlantic convoys. Dangerous and rough work, even without the German U-boats. Apparently, the escort ships were horribly unpleasant places in the frequent storms. Men were injured or killed all the time, just by being tossed about into metal bulkheads, and some went overboard in storms, if they were not careful. Then he got very somber, and related his terrible confession. On one Atlantic convoy, he'd murdered a fellow sailor, and got away with it. Way it happened allegedly was this: he was keeping watch by himself, when he was accosted by a fellow sailor. They were arguing about some petty bullshit or other, and if got physical. Professor A swung his fist and the other guy went headfirst into a metal bulkhead. It was at night, in the North Atlantic, the sea was really rough and the ship was blacked out. There he was, with the other guy bleeding, and not moving on the deck. Professor A panicked. He couldn't tell if the other guy was alive or dead. So instead of going for help, and maybe getting court-martialed, he dragged the other guy's body to the rail, and tossed him into the sea. The guy was eventually missed, but everyone assumed he'd been carelessly swept overboard, in the North Atlantic at night. His chance of surviving that was zero. So that was the end of it. By this time, in telling the story, Professor A was in tears of guilt. I had no idea how to react to this. I made my excuses and left. When I went home, I told my dad about what I had heard. To my surprise, he already knew. Apparently, Professor A had similarly confessed to him years ago, sort of like the ancient mariner from the rhyme. He was somehow compelled on occasion to confess his crime. As a kid, stuff that happened in the 1940s sounded like it happened a million years ago, so I never thought to pursue it any further. Funny, now that story is as long ago now as WW2 was then. Professor A is long passed away, so he was never caught and never punished for what he did, except, I believe, for his conscience. I think he thought about it every day and was truly remorseful. So I'm looking to buy a house. I have already moved me and my girlfriend into a flat share to save money, and it's coming round to us having to think about, can we afford a place or sign for another year in the tiny room I do some sums, and for deposit and fees, stamp duty etc. It's coming to like 20k, which we aren't gonna have, so I decide I need to make more money. I think about it, and maybe I can do some Amazon deliveries, but now I think I'm lucky to work from home. Maybe I can do something from here at the same time as my job, maybe translation via Skype or something, but I thought nah, that would be too embarrassing, so I decide I'll make videos of me waking, and try and sell them. So I research the market. I find a place where you can buy such clips direct from the creator. Seems to be a gap, as most of the videos of dude whacking off are gay videos, but I'm not gay, so I have surely found a gap in the market for women who want to watch guys waking right. Unless they are just buying the gay stuff, which I suppose they must be, I will be their savior. So I look into it, no outlay, apart for a reasonable webcam, so I drop 25 quid on that. It comes with some software for trimming the clip down, and I'm ready. I mean, I have a whack every day anyway. Might as well monetize it, but for my whacks. So I record a few, I think 4, so I can release one a day, or whatever, in case I need a day off working, and I got to upload them, but I haven't reached the minimum time. Videos have to be at least 3 minutes long. If only I wasn't so good at waking. So those 4 are useless. So I start again. I also noticed to open your channel you need 10 videos to start with. It's a setback. It's taking me 3 weeks just to get this gold out there, but I persevere, and I've got the 10. I decide people might pay more for slightly longer videos, so I make each one 5 minutes, and the way I do it is I just start recording while I start looking for the porn. My dick is all floppy, it's tiny. Maybe some women have a fetish about dicks that double in size. Or maybe they have a fetish about disguising themselves as someone's computer and having that viewpoint. I also at this point resigned to the idea that it's gonna be men waking to these, but that's fine. I upload, I sign off, I wait for the checks to roll in. Next time I sign in they aren't live. There is a problem, the descriptions are all the same. Well, duh. I essentially had copied, pasted and said, this is video 1 of me waking at my desk, enjoy watching me get hard, and then whack until I come. And I just changed the video 1 to video 2. I thought that would be enough to fool a computer. I guess not. So I had to thesaurus the hell out of it. This is video 2 in the series of me slapping the monkey at my desk. Watch as my phallus becomes engorged with blood and I stimulate it until completion. I had to do that for 10 videos. But finally I upload. I check the next day. I'm live and, because I'm new, it hits the recent page. I'm getting some hits. I haven't now jerked it in days with all this admin, but I signed back in again, and I have an email to my dumb email. Sales. Someone has bought 2 videos. 1 transaction. Didn't even buy one and test it. My marketing was enough. They bought episode 1 and 10. Who would do that? Who would spoil a box set like this? All the in-jokes aren't gonna make sense to you for episode 10. After this I drop off the recent page, and I'm struggling to find the energy, but I think I'll make some more, but I don't get any more sales. Maybe the reviews are out. Maybe it's the Groundhog Day of waking videos, but terrible, I don't know. I'm making £9 roughly of it, and I do get one more random sale, but it's been a month. Even just looking at the time I was actually selling, I realize it's going to take years for me to earn the extra £9,000 I need for the house deposit. So I think, hey, I will cash out, and that covers me for the webcam pretty much. This will just be a weird way for me have paid for the webcam fine. Nope. Can't cash out until you hit $150, and Brexit makes it even harder to get to that milestone. So my money is trapped. My pimp is gonna get to keep all the cash. How ridiculous. I shut it down cause I'm worried maybe I didn't hide my bedroom good enough. I worry someone will recognize the bedspread in the background of episode 6, which no one has purchased yet but is the best in the series. So it's over. I got a bit ahead of myself, and I have a mortgage advisor coming to the house. Me and my girlfriend have the day off to see him, and I feel like I'm wasting his time. We chat. I say, yeah, I dunno if we have near to a 10% deposit plus all these fees I didn't realize, having completely realized a month ago. He says, yeah, well, you do have the option of a 5% mortgage. Really? Then I think, if I can sell this webcam we actually have the money pretty much now. So moral of the story is, just don't film yourself waking, there is no money in it. Plus you will feel super embarrassed when you tell a load of people